Hey guys, tonight we're travelling back to the 1880s, a decade that looks like a sepia-toned dream until you're dropped right in the middle of it. It's the Gilded Age, where everything's coated in gold on the outside but rusting underneath. Imagine millionaires sipping champagne in marble mansions while kids half your age work 14-hour shifts in textile mills. You probably won't survive this. Seriously, one wrong drink of water or a horse-drawn trolley accident, and it's lights out. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your city and what time you're watching this. I want to know where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes in the summer of 1880. The air smells like coal smoke and horse manure. Your clothes are stiff wool, your shoes pinch, and your stomach. Already upset from yesterday's mystery stew. The nation is 10 years past the end of the Civil War, but the wounds haven't really healed. Reconstruction fizzled out, leaving the South simmering with resentment and racism. Meanwhile, cities like New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia are exploding with industry and people, growing so fast it's like the streets can't keep up. The Gilded Age gets its name from Mark Twain. Yeah, that Mark Twain, who pointed out how everything looks rich and glittery on the surface, but is mostly a mess underneath. It's not just about money. It's about the illusion of prosperity, of progress, when in reality the divide between the rich and poor is a canyon you could lose a whole city in. Imagine walking down Fifth Avenue in New York City in a rented top hat, just trying to blend in. Horse-drawn carriages clatter over cobblestones, their wheels splashing through puddles of who knows what. Gas lamps flicker even in daylight, casting a gloomy sort of charm. Women in bustles and men with gold pocket watches step out of opera houses and into the chaos of the street. But go just a few blocks south, and the picture changes fast. Tenement buildings groan under the weight of too many families. The smell of laundry water, boiled cabbage, and chamber pots baking in the sun rises in waves. You hear dozens of languages: Italian, Yiddish, German, Irish brogue. These are the people who keep the city humming: seamstresses, dock workers, shoeshine boys, newsies, chimney sweeps. And let's not sugarcoat it. Most Americans in the 1880s aren't millionaires. They're dirt poor, working class, or farming by the sweat of their brows on land that barely yields enough to break even. If you're rich, life is decadently good. Think champagne fountains and 12-course dinners served by butlers. If you're not, it's mostly oatmeal, blisters, and a landlord who doesn't believe in fixing things. Still, there's a strange optimism in the air. People believe in progress. Cities are being electrified. Machines are replacing hand labour. The telegraph has shrunk the country, and the railroad has sewn its pieces together. You could, if you had the money, ride a train from New York to San Francisco in less than a week. That's wild, considering your grandmother probably crossed the plains in a covered wagon and buried a few family members along the way. But this new modern America comes at a cost. Workers are starting to push back. Strikes erupt across industries. Union organisers are being jailed or worse. The bosses, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, they're hailed as visionaries but also accused of bleeding the poor dry. You might call them CEOs. Their enemies call them robber barons. At the same time, the country is trying to figure out who counts as American. The Chinese Exclusion Act is about to go into effect, banning Chinese labourers from immigrating. Native American tribes are being pushed off their land in the name of manifest destiny. Black Americans are facing lynchings, voter suppression, and violence in the South. And women? Let's just say they're expected to keep house, wear corsets, and avoid opinions, unless it's about what colour to embroider a handkerchief. Now here's something you didn't expect. Spiritualism is in. Seances, mediums, and communicating with the dead? Total dinner party fodder. You might think that sounds silly until you realise how many people have lost family in the Civil War. Talking to ghosts? That's therapy in 1880. And even among scholars, there's still debate about how gilded the Gilded Age really was. Some argue it was a necessary step toward modernisation, brutal but transformative. Others say it entrenched inequality in ways we still haven't fixed. Was it a time of booming innovation or the golden age of corruption? Or both? You'll get your hands dirty finding out. Tonight you'll walk these streets, you'll ride the trains, smell the soot, taste the desperation and the ambition. You'll meet the people, so many people, trying to claw their way up or just stay alive. So button up that stiff collar, watch your pockets, and maybe don't drink the water. You've got a long way to go. You take a step forward, and suddenly you're in the heart of New York City, 1880s style. It's overwhelming from the first breath, dense with the stink of coal smoke, horse droppings, and the wet sourness of 10,000 bodies packed too close together. The sound is relentless. Metal wheels screeching over rails, hawkers shouting about oysters or newspapers, church bells tolling, babies wailing, and the low drone of wagons thumping over cobblestones. This isn't the gleaming skyline you're used to, it's soot-covered brick, with clotheslines strung between buildings like tired bunting, and windows cracked open just enough to let in air, but not the rats. You're standing at the edge of Broadway, where ironclad buildings stretch 3 and 4 stories up like looming grandparents. Shopkeepers sweep their stoops, their brooms stirring up the ever-present film of black dust that never really settles. Every few blocks you dodge piles of horse manure, and you quickly learn to walk in the street, not too close to the buildings where loose bricks or chamber pot water might come down at any second. That's right. People are still dumping waste out windows here. There's no trash pickup, no sanitation department. If you're not rich enough to live near Central Park, you're stuck breathing in the leftovers of humanity all day. This is a city in motion. Elevated trains rumble overhead, their iron frames shaking as they pass, raining soot and ash on the street below. The smell of the coal that powers them is in everything. You duck into a bakery to escape the noise, and for a moment you're surrounded by warmth. Fresh rye bread, caraway seeds, and the scent of yeast clinging to the wooden walls. The woman behind the counter has a strong Yiddish accent and flour on her sleeves. She calls you boy chick and hands over a roll that's hot enough to burn your fingers. People are everywhere. Shoe shiners kneeling on street corners, newsboys with papers under their arms shouting headlines, and women in shawls hauling children and baskets from tenement to market and back again. A trolley rumbles by, pulled by a pair of sweating horses, the driver flicking his reins like he's scolding the street. The people riding it, men in stovepipe hats, women balancing parasols, and a very flustered-looking nun clutching a sack of potatoes. In the nicer parts of town you spot the Gilded Age elites. Think men with top hats tall enough to scrape ceilings and mustaches, waxed to an offensive sharpness. Their wives walk half a step behind them, stiff in bustled gowns and wide-brimmed hats, their expressions somewhere between bored and mildly nauseated. They pass by without looking down at the flower seller on the corner, or the beggar boy missing 3 fingers. You wonder if they even see the city you're standing in. The rich live in brownstone mansions with marble stairs and thick velvet curtains. They ride in private carriages with brass lanterns and have footmen who do absolutely nothing but look dramatic and open doors. But for every Carnegie mansion, there are 10 buildings packed with immigrant families, sharing single rooms and coughing themselves awake every morning in their sleep. By the way, don't get sick here. Hospitals are not where you want to be. In fact, stay as healthy as you can. The smell alone outside Bellevue Hospital would knock you out. Inside? Let's just say antiseptic isn't really a thing yet, and your odds of leaving are basically 50-50. There's a building near Mulberry Bend, if you can call it that, made entirely of splintering wood and patched brick, filled with families from Sicily, Ireland and Poland. Inside, a widow with 5 children boils cabbage over a stove that also warms the room. Above her, a man snores through tuberculosis. There's one outhouse for the entire block. You can hear coughing from every corner, babies crying through thin walls, and creaky bed springs that never quite go quiet. But here's the weird thing. There's a pulse to this city. A heartbeat. Somehow, people are still laughing. You hear it when a butcher haggles playfully with a housewife, or when a boy jumps onto the back of a delivery wagon and yells like he's won the lottery. Immigrant families start new traditions in old neighbourhoods. Street performers draw crowds. You stop to watch a man with a trained monkey pick pockets under the guise of doing tricks. No one minds, it's New York. One curious footnote. Some streets are haunted. At least that's what the locals whisper. Ghost stories bloom in the night air. A spectral carriage seen at midnight. The crying of a murdered child in the alley off Hester Street. A headless cat that guards a pawn shop. You scoff, but that shadow you just saw out of the corner of your eye, it moved too fast to be nothing. Historians still argue about how livable these cities actually were. Some claim they were hellish, overcrowded incubators of disease and crime. Others argue they offered unprecedented opportunity, a rough but real chance to start over. After all, more than half of America's population is now living in cities like this. Whether that's a good thing or not depends on who you ask. For a steelworker's child, it's misery. For a bootblack who goes on to own 3 shops by 1895, it's the American dream. You cross Canal Street, where vendors sell everything from used boots to slightly less used boots. It smells like fish and coal and unwashed hair. You hear 4 languages in a single sentence and realise no one's really from here. But everyone's trying to become something here. You move with the crowd, pulled forward by the city's strange gravity, a mix of dread and hope, and sour bread rising in a back alley oven. And that's just one afternoon. The next morning you wake up somewhere entirely different. Flat land as far as the eye can see, a dry breeze scratching at your cheeks, and not a soul around for miles. You're not in New York anymore. Welcome to the American Frontier 1880s edition. The nearest town is a 2-day wagon ride away. Your neighbours are prairie dogs and distant coyotes, and if you forgot your matches, good luck starting a fire. The land around you is raw and restless. This is the era of the Homestead Act, where anyone, well, anyone white, can claim a plot of land if they're brave or foolish enough to settle it. And here you are, holding a government-issued deed, standing on your own 160 acres of wind, weeds and promise. You live in a sod house. That's not a cute name for a cottage. It's literally blocks of grass and dirt carved out of the earth, stacked into walls like muddy bricks. There's no insulation, no paint, no front porch swing. Just the smell of damp soil and the occasional worm making its way across your floor. The roof leaks when it rains and groans when it doesn't. You sleep on a straw-stuffed mattress next to your shotgun and pray nothing slithers in while you're dreaming. It's not cosy, it's survival. Every day starts the same. You rise with the sun and get straight to work because the land doesn't plough itself. Your oxen are stubborn, your hands blister easily, and the tools break more often than you'd like to admit. There's no break room. No weekend, no sick days. Just you, a wooden plough, and a lot of second-guessing. Some mornings you squint into the distance and see nothing but grass and sky, and you swear the horizon is laughing at you. But even out here, you're not entirely alone. Other homesteaders have carved out their own dusty patches across the plains. Swedish families, German farmers, freed black settlers, and even a few women trying to stake their own claims. You cross paths occasionally, usually at the nearest general store or at a community barn raising, where everyone gathers not for fun but because no one wants to die building alone. The social calendar is bone dry, unless you count mail day. On those rare occasions when the post arrives, it's like Christmas. A letter from your sister in Ohio, or a newspaper 3 weeks out of date, is enough to lift your spirits for a day. And let's talk about the weather. Tornadoes, droughts, blizzards. They don't just ruin your plans, they destroy your life. One spring morning, your crops are sprouting just fine. By nightfall, a hailstorm has flattened everything. You step outside afterward and see your dreams scattered in bits of green pulp and broken fence posts. That's life on the prairie, fragile and unforgiving. There's no safety net out here. You lose your harvest and that's it. Starve or move. Quirky fact, some frontier women became famous sharpshooters. You might have heard of Annie Oakley. She was born into poverty, learned to hunt to feed her family, and by the 1880s she was performing with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Out here, everyone learned to shoot, but Annie, she could split a playing card from 30 paces with a .22. Some homesteads had a copy of the Bible, a cast-iron stove and a revolver, in that order. Now, despite what Hollywood might sell you, most of the West wasn't shootouts and outlaws. It was back-breaking work and endless waiting. But trouble did ride through, now and then. Horse thieves, land disputes, and drunk neighbours could lead to fights that didn't always end clean. If someone built their fence a few feet into your claim, the law might be 3 counties away, or just not interested. Disputes got settled with fists, shovels, or worse. Meanwhile, the US government was aggressively pushing expansion. Railroads sliced across the wilderness, bringing towns, telegraphs, and tourists. But they also brought heartbreak. Native American tribes, many already relocated under earlier treaties, were pushed again and again off their lands to make room for people like you. The buffalo, slaughtered in massive numbers to starve out the tribes that depended on them. You might be thrilled to finally see the train stop near your farm, but that steam whistle also signals the erasure of entire nations. Scholars still argue over the myth of the pioneer spirit. Some say it celebrates independence, courage, and the American dream. Others point out that this so-called dream rested on stolen land, ecological destruction, and federal subsidies that weren't exactly self-made. Either way, when you're out here, you start to wonder whether grit is really a virtue or just a necessity when there's no other option. Some nights you sit outside with a tin cup of bitter coffee and stare at the stars, which blaze brighter here than anywhere you've ever seen. The wind moves across the grass like an invisible wave, and the silence is so thick it feels sacred. You think of home, of city lights, of beds with springs and food that didn't come from sheer guesswork. And still, something about this place keeps you rooted. Maybe it's the pride of trying. Maybe it's the quiet thrill of building something real with your own hands. A neighbour once told you that if you survive the first 5 years, you'll be all right. That's a mighty big if. It's late afternoon when you hear it. A distant metallic rattle building into a thunderous roar. The ground shakes faintly under your boots, and a whistle splits the horizon. You step back from your work in the field and watch a monstrous machine streak across the prairie like a steel dragon. It's a train. It blurs past in a puff of soot and speed, hauling freight and passengers across land that was almost impassable just a few decades ago. The railroads are here and they're changing everything. You decide to follow the tracks, hitch a ride to a station town, your destination, wherever the Gilded Age titans made their fortune and bent the rules to do it. The ticket clerk barely glances at you. The train smells like oil and sweat, and the wood bench beneath you creaks with every bump. You're riding third class, which is a polite way of saying no frills, no cushion, and no heat in the winter. Still, it's faster than a wagon and definitely better than walking. You glance up the rail line and imagine you're looking down the backbone of America. Railroads in the 1880s aren't just transportation, they're the arteries of commerce, pulsing with cattle, lumber, grain, and coal. They connect frontier outposts to booming cities and allow people, ideas, and goods to move at unprecedented speed. Before, it might have taken you 3 months to cross the country. Now, less than a week. Of course, you'd need a little cash and nerves of steel. As you reach Chicago, it hits you. This city is a living, smoking tribute to the power of railroads. It's practically been reborn around the tracks, warehouses stacked high with goods from every direction. Freight cars clatter in and out like clockwork. You see porters unloading crates of oranges from California, steel from Pittsburgh, and even pineapples, from somewhere much warmer than Illinois. The city moves to the rhythm of the trains. They are the heartbeat. But who made it happen? Enter the robber barons. These are the industrial titans of the era. Cornelius Vanderbilt, Jay Gould, and Leland Stanford, among others. They didn't build the railroads with their hands, but they sure built empires out of them. Vanderbilt turned a modest steamboat hustle into a railroad monopoly. Gould manipulated stocks like a puppet master, making fortunes while destroying competitors. And Stanford? He parlayed railroad ownership into a political career, then used the profits to found a university that still bears his name. You might admire them. You might also want to strangle them. Their tactics were ruthless. They bought politicians like trading cards, bribed judges, crushed labour unions, and set prices to bankrupt their rivals. And while some people called them visionaries, others, especially those crushed under the wheels of their industries, called them parasites. The term robber baron wasn't a compliment. Still, there's no denying they shaped the country. Every rail spike driven into the dirt paved the way for new cities, new fortunes, and new inequities. And the working conditions, let's just say no one was getting dental. Labourers, especially Chinese immigrants in the West, laid the tracks through mountains and deserts, often in blistering heat or deadly cold. Accidents were frequent. Explosions, cave-ins, frostbite, dynamite mishaps, you name it. On average, 2 workers died for every mile of track laid across the Sierra Nevadas. And when the job was done, most were discarded like broken tools. You hop off the train in Omaha, where the lines converge like veins into a hub of cattle and steel. The air stinks of livestock and engine grease. Men in wool coats bark into megaphones, organising shipments and barking orders. Somewhere you hear a brass band playing ragtime, and for a second you forget how much of this empire is built on sweat and bones. Quirky footnote, the railroads even standardised time. Before the 1880s, every town used its own version of local noon. But with trains running across multiple states, the chaos became unbearable. So the railroad companies created time zones: Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific. It wasn't the government, it was the railroads that told Americans what time it was. Literally. If you didn't adjust your clocks, you missed your train. Simple as that. Still, despite their reach, the barons weren't invincible. The courts began to catch up. By the late 1880s, the Interstate Commerce Act was passed, aimed at reining in the worst abuses of the railroad monopolies. It was the first time the federal government tried to regulate a big business. Not super effectively, mind you, but it was something. Scholars are split on whether the robber barons were economic heroes or villains in velvet waistcoats. Some argue they laid the foundation for modern infrastructure. Others say they entrenched a brutal form of capitalism that ignored humanity in pursuit of profits. Were they builders of progress or architects of inequality? You ride the rails long enough, and you'll start to see that maybe the answer is both. As the sun sinks behind the grain elevators of Omaha, you lean back against a stack of freight crates and listen to the low hiss of a departing locomotive. The air is warm, the dust golden. You think about how far the country has come in a decade, and how much it's cost, how much it still costs. And as that train disappears down the track, you wonder who's getting rich tonight, and who's not making it home. The whistle of the train fades into the distance, and you find yourself standing on the edge of a factory district, where the air is hot, metallic, and laced with the sound of relentless motion. Clang, hiss, clatter, repeat. Welcome to your new job. You're part of America's vast and groaning industrial machine now, one of the millions filing into brick-walled factories 6 days a week, 13 hours a day, for the privilege of going home tired, soot-covered, and underpaid. You enter through a heavy iron door punched in for the day shift, and it hits you. This isn't work. This is war with bolts and smoke. The inside of the building is a furnace, noisy, smog-choked and grimy. It smells like hot grease, sweat, and something burning that probably shouldn't be. Rows of machines line the floor, clunking away like giant metal insects. You're lucky to find a spot. There's always someone younger, faster, or more desperate waiting to replace you. And speaking of young, you glance to your left and see a boy no older than 10 tightening bolts on a moving press. His face is ghost pale from factory dust. His hands are calloused, and he's not even tall enough to reach the top of the machine without standing on a box. In the 1880s, child labour is just a regular Tuesday. Laws exist, but they're flimsier than wet paper and rarely enforced. Kids work in textile mills, glass factories, coal mines, and meatpacking plants. Why? Because they're cheap, obedient, and small enough to reach inside the gears when something jams. If they get injured, and they do, often, there's no compensation, no therapy, no justice. Just a shrug from the foreman, and maybe a replacement by the next morning. Your foreman, by the way, is a human bullfrog with a cigar permanently welded to the corner of his mouth. He bellows orders over the roar of machines and seems to enjoy finding fault with your work. You get one 10-minute break for lunch. It's not enough time to leave, so you sit on a pile of scrap wood and eat bread that tastes like it might have been baked during the Civil War. If you're lucky, someone's brought pickles. If you're really lucky, they'll share. The machines don't care about you. They spin and slam and rattle with terrifying indifference. One moment of distraction, and you could lose a finger, or worse. And it's not like there's insurance. Most companies couldn't spell liability, let alone cover it. If you get injured, you're expected to go home, rest, somehow, and either return when you can still stand or get replaced. That's the deal. Still, not everyone accepts it quietly. A movement is growing. Labour unions are forming across the country, demanding better wages, shorter hours, and safer conditions. The Knights of Labour, the biggest of the era, dream of uniting workers across trades and backgrounds. They hold rallies, organise strikes, and occasionally succeed, until factory owners call in the police or private thugs to beat everyone back into line. You might have heard about the Great Railroad Strike a few years ago. It shut down the country's rail system and ended with state militias firing into crowds. One thing's clear: if you want a better life, you're going to have to fight for it. And there's always someone watching. The factory owner, for example, sits 3 floors above in an office, with actual windows and a desk made of mahogany. He's never set foot on the factory floor. He probably doesn't even know your name. But he knows the numbers, and if profits drop or orders slow, there's a good chance your job will vanish like smoke in a breeze. Welcome to industrial capitalism. You're a cog in a wheel that never stops spinning. Here's a strange detail for you. Some factories actually lock the exits during work hours. The idea is to prevent theft or unscheduled breaks. But the result? If there's a fire, good luck getting out. Fires were horrifyingly common, especially in textile factories packed with cotton dust and grease. One spark and the place goes up like kindling. It's not just hypothetical, tragedies happen. And no, the fire code doesn't exist yet. One scholar you overheard in a tavern debates whether industrialisation was truly a net gain for the working class. Sure, wages increased marginally, and mass production made goods cheaper, but at what cost? Broken bodies, broken families, and entire communities built around toxic, life-draining labour. Others argue it was a necessary evolution, a step toward the modern economy. You're too tired to take a side. Your boots are soaked with oil, your ears are ringing, and your back feels like it's aged 20 years in one shift. After work, you shuffle into the night with 1,000 others. The streets are choked with smoke from nearby foundries. You pass a group of workers leaning against a wall, comparing blisters. A few cough up black phlegm without even looking surprised. A newspaper boy cries out the headlines. Some political scandal, another strike broken by Pinkertons, a bread riot in another city. You throw him a coin and head to the boarding house where you rent a bed in a room shared with 6 other workers. Your mattress is straw, your blanket smells like mildew, and someone's snoring before you even get your boots off. But in this strange, brutal rhythm, you find something close to meaning. You're part of something bigger now, a force reshaping the world, one gear turn at a time. And if you can hang on, maybe, just maybe, you'll live long enough to see it all pay off. You barely sleep. The sounds of coughing, creaking floorboards, and a nearby couple arguing through the thin wall keep you in that twitchy half-dream state, until the light from a gas lamp outside finally fades. Morning arrives without ceremony. Your body aches in places you didn't know existed, but today's not about factories or ploughing fields. It's about starting over, because this morning, you're not native to this soil. You're arriving in America for the first time, an immigrant stepping off the ship with a name barely pronounceable in English, and a suitcase packed with more dreams than clothes. The year is 1880, and Ellis Island hasn't even opened yet. That comes in the 1890s. Right now, you're processed through Castle Garden in New York City, a hulking, drafty structure that smells like wet rope and ocean brine. You stand in a long line that moves at the pace of molasses in January. Around you are hundreds of others, tired families from Italy, young men from Germany, Jewish merchants from Eastern Europe, and women with wide eyes and bundles of fabric clutched tight to their chests. Some have been on ships for weeks, others left behind farms, jobs, even children. All of you are here chasing a fantasy whispered across continents. America, land of golden streets and unlimited bread. The reality, it hits like a wave of cold city air and bureaucratic indifference. You're prodded, questioned, examined for lice, and watched closely for signs of disease. If you blink too long or limp too noticeably, you could be sent back across the ocean on the next steamship. Families are sometimes separated in a moment. Mother cleared, child not. No time for goodbye, no room for appeal. It's a gamble, every step of the way. But today, you're lucky. You're cleared and released into the city with a name badge around your neck and 10 borrowed dollars in your pocket. You don't speak much English, but you find your way to a boarding house filled with others from your region. People cook the food you grew up on, speak the language of your grandparents, and help you find your first job, usually something no one else wants to do. Washing laundry, hauling coal, working in a slaughterhouse, or stitching until your fingers bleed in a tenement sweatshop. It's miserable, but it's yours. New York isn't the only destination. Many immigrants are funneled to cities like Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, or Cincinnati. Wherever there's labour to be exploited, there's room for a newcomer. Some head west to join homesteader communities, but most stay where they can find work fast and sleep somewhere cheap. You quickly learn to navigate your new world. What corners are safe, who hires fairly, which baker sells bread a day old but half the price. Quirky reality. Many immigrants Americanize their names, not by choice, but because someone at the port couldn't spell them. Antonin Dvořák becomes Tony Dawn. Marta Skłodowska turns into Mary Sloan. You're expected to blend in, even as you're mocked for your accent, your food, your holidays. Your child will likely be bilingual by age 5, switching between languages at school and at home like it's second nature. But the challenges go far beyond pronunciation. There's open hostility. Newspapers shout warnings of foreign hordes, blaming immigrants for crime, disease, and job scarcity. Irish immigrants are labelled lazy drunks. Italians are called criminals. Jews are accused of stealing jobs and undermining American values. Entire ethnic groups are painted as threats to the purity of American life. The know-nothing sentiment may have faded, but its rotten roots still reach deep. Still, immigrant communities dig in. They build churches, synagogues, grocers and social clubs. They organise mutual aid societies to help cover funeral costs or doctor visits. They create ethnic newspapers to keep ties to the old country strong. Life is hard, but not hopeless. You see weddings in tenement courtyards, parades for obscure saints, and kitchens bursting with the smell of garlic, dill, cabbage or chili powder, depending on who's cooking. The open scholarly debate here is whether America truly functioned as a melting pot, or more like a stew where ingredients never fully blended. Some historians argue that immigrants quickly assimilated and formed a new unified identity. Others push back, pointing to enduring ethnic enclaves and the slow, painful nature of integration. Walking through Little Italy or a Polish quarter, you feel it for yourself. Yes, these communities are adapting, but they're also holding fast to what they left behind. A few manage to rise out of poverty. Your roommate's cousin starts as a fruit peddler and, a decade later, owns a corner store. Another man you meet in a labour line can write in 3 languages and spends his evenings reading by candlelight. One day, he'll be a schoolteacher. You realise that survival isn't the only story here. Ambition simmers beneath the exhaustion. The idea of upward mobility might be exaggerated, but it's not a complete myth. And yet, as you stare out your tiny window at the rust-coloured alleyway below, you understand something very clearly. The version of America you imagined before you got here, it doesn't exist. Not exactly. The streets aren't paved with gold. Sometimes they aren't even paved. But the opportunity to build something, to become something, still pulses underneath it all, if you can endure long enough. The city quiets down only slightly at night. The factories don't stop. The horses don't rest. But you sit at a small wooden table with a chipped mug of coffee, writing a letter home in uneven handwriting, trying to make it sound better than it is. You tell them you're okay, that America is hard but not hopeless, that maybe next year you'll bring them here too. You walk through the narrow alleyway behind your tenement, dodging puddles of something you're pretty sure isn't just rainwater, and step out into the street. The skies are dull dishwater grey, but the city around you bursts with life. Pushcarts rattling, babies crying, street vendors shouting in accents thick as gravy. But today, the noise shifts. A parade of women is moving down the street, and they are marching like they mean it. Hats tilted just so, skirts swishing with every determined step, some holding signs that say things like votes for women and equal pay for equal work. You blink. This isn't the delicate, demure version of a womanhood you've been sold. This is the 1880s undercurrent of rebellion, and you're walking right into it. Let's be clear. The standard role of a woman in this era is tight-laced and painfully proper. Literally. Corsets are the norm, bone and steel contraptions yanked so tight they leave bruises and cause fainting spells. Getting dressed takes over an hour and at least one maid if you're rich. Underneath it all, chemise, corset, petticoats, bustle pads, a skirt heavy enough to anchor a ship, and a bodice buttoned to your chin. And God help you if a single hair escapes your updo. Modesty and restraint aren't just expectations. They're your currency in society. But while you've been told women should be seen, not heard, plenty of them are making noise anyway. You meet one, a fire-eyed schoolteacher who moonlights as a suffragist. Her name is Margaret, and she invites you to a women's rights meeting being held in the back of a church. Candles flickering, folding chairs creaking, the air thick with a mix of powder and defiance. They talk about the right to vote, about equal education, about pushing back against laws that make women legal property of their husbands. One woman reads aloud from a pamphlet by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and the room practically hums with shared fury. You realise quickly that women in the 1880s are caught in a strange in-between. On the one hand, traditional roles are rigid. Women are expected to marry, bear children, run a household, and keep quiet. On the other, new ideas are creeping in. Education for girls is slowly expanding. Women's colleges are popping up, Mount Holyoke, Vassar, Wellesley, where young women learn Latin, literature and science, instead of just needlepoint and posture. Not that society makes it easy. Too much thinking, some warn, can damage a woman's womb. So yeah, that's the level of medical consensus we're working with. The debate around women's rights is raging in public and private, At dinner tables, husbands shake their heads over newspaper reports about female agitators, while wives roll their eyes quietly and pass the gravy. Some women push the boundaries more directly. You might run into a few new women, educated, unmarried and uninterested in settling for the usual path. They ride bicycles, read political essays and work jobs outside the home, gasp, without collapsing into hysteria. Not everyone cheers them on, of course. Mainstream media mocks suffragists as masculine, shrill, or just plain unattractive. Political cartoons show them abandoning babies and burning dinner while marching in the streets. But the women keep marching anyway. Some chain themselves to buildings, others write passionate editorials. The fight is gaining steam, even if the vote itself is still decades away. You also meet domestic workers, black women, Irish immigrants, and girls barely out of childhood, scrubbing floors in rich people's homes for pennies. They wear threadbare uniforms, their hands always chapped from soap and scalding water. Their work is invisible but constant, the kind of labour that props up entire households without ever being recognised. And God help them if they speak out or show even a flicker of independence. Quirky twist. Despite the heavy skirts and rigid expectations, some women find clever workarounds. There are female inventors like Margaret Knight, who created a machine that made flat-bottomed paper bags. Yes, the same kind you still get groceries in. Or Victoria Woodhull, a stockbroker and spiritualist who ran for president in 1872, before women could even vote. There are women running newspapers, owning businesses, and even studying medicine, quietly or loudly pushing the edge of what's acceptable. Still, the dominant tone is restraint. You visit a middle-class parlour, and it's like stepping into a lace-curtained pressure cooker. The furniture is stiff, the tea is tepid, and conversation centres on embroidery, seasonal fruit, and whether or not young Mabel should be seen walking alone to piano lessons. Everything is coded, indirect. Women express frustration through tight smiles and passive-aggressive needlepoint. A tidy home is a happy soul. There's a deeper tension too. Race and class weave through the women's movement in complicated, often uncomfortable ways. Black women are frequently excluded from mainstream suffrage groups, even though many are leading their own organising efforts in churches and community halls. Working-class women sometimes resent upper-class suffragists who don't understand the daily grind. So while the headlines talk about women's rights, behind the scenes it's more like some women's rights to eventually or to maybe. Historians still debate how much real progress women made in this decade. Some argue that the 1880s were a slow boil that led to the major victories of the early 20th century. Others see it as a frustrating plateau, where energy surged but laws barely budged. But either way, there's no denying that the push for change is alive, even if it's still wearing ankle boots and pinned up hair. As night falls, you pass a group of girls skipping rope in the street, chanting rhymes in accents that twist the English language into something half magic. Their mothers lean out of windows above, shouting in 4 languages, watching, always watching. The world may expect them to marry mother and fade, but something tells you they're going to do a lot more than that. The street outside your boarding house is quiet now, still damp from last night's rain, and glowing orange under the flickering gas lamps. You hear the faint clip-clop of a carriage, and somewhere in the distance a dog barking at nothing. But tonight, you're not thinking about gas lamps or sidewalks. You're heading south, down into the post-Reconstruction world of the 1880s. A place where the Civil War is over, slavery has been abolished, and yet somehow for black Americans, freedom still feels like a fragile rumour. You arrive in a small southern town, red dirt roads, crooked wooden porches, and cypress trees hunched like old men. The war's been over for 15 years, but you'd hardly know it. Bullet holes still pockmark brick buildings, and the Confederate flag still appears in shop windows like a ghost that refuses to stay buried. You walk past an old plantation house, its columns still grand, but the paint peeling, the yard choked with weeds. A black sharecropper tills the field where his ancestors were enslaved. He's not shackled anymore, but looking at his worn hands, bent back and sun-scorched face, you wonder if he's truly free. Welcome to the South in the 1880s, an uneasy balance of old bitterness and new oppression, where the promises of Reconstruction are being quietly dismantled, one broken law and broken life at a time. The federal troops are gone, the Freedmen's Bureau is gone, and with them went any real effort to protect the rights of the newly freed. You meet a schoolteacher named Elijah, a soft-spoken man with calloused fingers and sharp eyes. He teaches black children in a one-room shack with a dirt floor and no supplies, just a borrowed Bible and a blackboard salvaged from a church basement. His students walk miles to get there, sometimes barefoot, sometimes hungry, always hopeful. And yet, the white school 2 blocks away gets fresh books, windows that close, and actual desks. When you ask Elijah why he keeps teaching, he says, because learning is the one thing they can't burn. Still, the threat of violence hangs heavy. The Ku Klux Klan isn't just a whisper here. It's a real masked presence, operating in the shadows but felt in the daylight. Black men who vote, who buy land, who even walk too confidently down the street can find themselves targets. Lynching is a word you don't say out loud, but everyone knows what it means. One black man was murdered last week for allegedly looking wrong at a white woman. No one was arrested. No one ever is. Laws are changing too, quietly and with legal precision. Poll taxes, literacy tests and grandfather clauses are being introduced to keep black citizens from voting. On paper, nothing says, you can't vote because you're black. In practice, that's exactly what it means. The 15th Amendment may still exist, but it's being gutted from the inside out. You attend a Sunday church service in a small clapboard building that shakes when people shout Amen. The choir is dressed in mismatched clothes and pure conviction. You've never heard singing like this. Voices rising in sorrow and joy, layered with something deeper than music. The sermon is fiery, hopeful, defiant. The preacher shouts about justice, about dignity, about the Lord seeing everything that men try to hide. People nod, cry, shout, clap. For an hour, maybe 2, the burdens of this world feel a little lighter. Black communities are building more than churches. There are black-owned businesses, newspapers, schools, and mutual aid societies. Despite the odds, people are carving out lives, raising families, planting gardens, and dreaming beyond the limitations placed on them. You sit down with a widow named Sarah, who runs a boarding house and raises 3 children on her own. She tells you, the world doesn't expect much from us. But we don't live for their expectations. Her eldest daughter wants to be a teacher. Her youngest draws pictures of trains and dreams of seeing the world beyond Georgia. Quirky fact. The early black press is already active and powerful. Newspapers like the Chicago Defender and the New York Freeman are circulating, giving voice to a community that refuses to be silenced. Writers, poets, and speakers, many of them formerly enslaved, are shaping a vibrant culture of resistance and pride. You read a copy of the Christian Recorder left on a table and find a poem that hits harder than any political speech you've heard all week. But not everyone in the country understands, or wants to understand, what's happening here. Northern papers speak of progress in the South. Politicians speak of reconciliation between North and South, as if the biggest divide isn't racial but regional. You start to see the cold truth. The country's moving on, even if black Americans are still stuck fighting for the most basic rights. The North is getting rich off industry and immigration. The South is clinging to old hierarchies, reshaping them into new laws and customs, and caught in the middle are millions of people whose very existence is seen as inconvenient. Scholars argue about this era constantly. Some call it the nadir of American race relations, the lowest point since emancipation. Others say it was a period of planting seeds, of community building, of survival that would later fuel the civil rights movements of the 20th century. You stand in a cotton field, watching a young man in overalls walk home with a sack of seed on his back, and wonder how history will remember him. As a victim, a fighter, a name no one wrote down. The sun sets blood orange over the pine trees. You hear crickets, frogs, and the rustle of something in the brush. You're not afraid, not exactly. But you feel the weight of eyes that never stop watching. In the South of the 1880s, silence can be survival, but so can song, and you hum the church tune under your breath as you walk back to town, hoping that somehow, against all odds, the melody will carry forward. You leave the red dust of the South behind, trading whispering pine trees for open plains and broken treaties. The air grows drier, the towns farther apart, and the train begins to pass through land that once stretched untouched from horizon to horizon. But not anymore. By the 1880s, the native nations who've lived here for thousands of years are being squeezed into ever smaller patches of earth, caught between promises made and promises shattered. You step off at a frontier depot, boots crunching dry gravel, and realise quickly, This land remembers what the government hopes you'll forget. You're in what was once Lakota territory, now sliced up by railroad tracks, homesteader fences, and federal designated reservations. A short ride brings you to one such reservation, hot, dusty, and isolated, bordered not by walls but by a long, invisible perimeter of neglect. Life here is quiet, but not peaceful. You feel it in the stillness, in the wary glances, in the way every building sags under the weight of broken promises. This isn't a home, it's a holding pen. You meet a man named Thomas, a Lakota elder with a voice like gravel and eyes that have seen too much. He shows you around the reservation, wooden cabins where teepees once stood, rows of government-issued rations stored in locked sheds, and a small chapel where missionaries hold services in a language no one spoke here before. They want us to forget, he says, not angrily, just flatly. Forget who we are, where we came from, what we know. The US government's approach is clear: assimilation or extinction. And they're not subtle about it. Native children are taken from their families and sent to boarding schools hundreds of miles away, Carlisle, Haskell, dozens more, where their hair is cut, their languages forbidden, and their identities crushed under the weight of uniforms and forced prayers. Kill the Indian, save the man, the school's founder famously said. And no, that wasn't a metaphor, it was a mission statement. Some kids never come back, and the ones who do, they return changed, speaking English, confused, caught between two worlds, sometimes unwelcome in both. You meet a teenage girl named Lila, recently returned from one such school. She barely speaks, but her eyes flicker with emotion when she hears her mother quietly humming a traditional song. You see her hands twitch at the rhythm, remembering something she's been told to forget. Meanwhile, out on the plains, the buffalo are gone, wiped out, practically erased. In just a few decades, the great herds that once numbered in the tens of millions have been reduced to a few scattered remnants. The reasons? Market hunting, sport shooting, and above all, strategy. Destroy the buffalo, and you destroy the tribes who depend on them. You can still find bleached skulls on the prairie if you look hard enough, bones of beasts killed not for food, but for empire. Quirky detail? There were so many buffalo killed in the 1870s and 80s that train companies had to build special flat cars just to haul their hides east. A single day's ride might show you dozens of carcasses left to rot where they fell. Some tourists even came out west to shoot them from train windows for fun. Yeah, that happened. And the treaties? Dozens were signed, fewer honoured. Land promised to tribes forever is reallocated as soon as someone discovers gold, silver or fertile soil. The Black Hills, sacred to the Lakota, were guaranteed in perpetuity, until gold was found and soldiers came knocking. You read one treaty over the shoulder of a translator and wonder how something so official can mean so little. The paper is crisp, the signature's neat, but it carries the weight of lies. There are sparks of resistance, though. You hear whispers of a man named Sitting Bull, living under surveillance but still respected, still feared, and another man, Crazy Horse, killed just a few years ago under suspicious circumstances, but still spoken of with reverence. Not everyone went quietly. The Battle of Little Bighorn was just 4 years ago, and while it was a rare native victory, it also sparked fierce retaliation from the US Army. The West is being won, but it's not by fairness, it's by force. Scholars still argue whether this era was one of tragic inevitability or avoidable betrayal. Some claim expansion was destiny, that progress demanded sacrifice. Others see the entire century as a slow, systematic erasure of people, culture, and sovereignty. You don't need a degree to see what's happening. Just eyes, just ears. You join a small gathering one evening hidden from view, where older tribe members tell stories in the old language. The children sit cross-legged, listening with wide eyes as tales of creation, bravery, and trickster spirits unfold. No notebooks, no recordings, just memory passed like flame from one generation to the next. It's beautiful, it's defiant, and it's shrinking. One woman, named Winner, sings an old song that rises into the night air like smoke. You don't understand the words, but you feel them. Deep, steady, full of everything the world has tried to take. Her voice doesn't waver. She sings for her people, for her mother, for her future grandchildren. She sings because she refuses to go silent. As you leave the reservation the next morning, you glance back over your shoulder and see children playing in the dirt. A man whittling wood with practiced hands, and a group of women hanging laundry that billows like sails in the wind, the scene is ordinary, which is why it matters. It's survival, plain and powerful. The train whistle calls again, a sharp intrusion into the slow rhythm of life here. You step aboard, heart heavy, eyes wide open. Behind you, history folds into dust. Ahead, more people, more struggle, more stories. But for now, you carry the weight of this place with you. Its silence, its resilience, and the quiet truth that conquered doesn't mean erased. The train rumbles westward, and the land begins to change. It flattens, then rolls, then rises into dry hills and jagged cliffs. The buildings grow fewer, the people rowdier, and the rules looser. You pull into a station with a name that sounds like a joke or a dare. Deadwood, Tombstone, Dodge City. Take your pick. This is the so-called Wild West, and if you're expecting gunslingers, saloons, and general lawlessness, you're not entirely wrong. But you'll want to keep a hand near your wallet and maybe a flask in your coat, because this part of the 1880s doesn't run on dreams. It runs on grit, lies, whiskey, and desperation. You step off the train into a swirling mix of dust and opportunity. The first thing that hits you is the smell: sweat, horses, leather, whiskey, and old blood. The streets are a mess of wagons, dogs, miners, and the occasional prospector talking to himself. You pass a sign for a barber, but he also does dentistry and gun repair. That's the kind of town you're in. The main street has everything a lawless soul might need. 2 saloons, a gambling hall, a brothel, a blacksmith, and a small, underfunded sheriff's office that looks like it gets robbed more than it protects. You spot the sheriff leaning back in a rocking chair on the porch, cleaning a revolver with a piece of old curtain. He nods to you but doesn't get up. He's probably waiting to see if you're trouble or not. The saloon is where you get your first real taste of this place. Swinging doors, sawdust on the floor, an out-of-tune piano in the corner. The bartender serves whiskey that tastes like regret and charges triple if you look too clean. A woman in a red dress with a slit too high for polite society offers to deal you into a poker game with the kind of smile that says she's either your new best friend or about to steal everything you own. Possibly both. You sit down next to a prospector who smells like dynamite and old pickles. He tells you he came out here chasing silver and struck a vein, then lost it all to gambling, drinking, and a woman named Boots. He doesn't seem particularly sad about it. That's the thing about this world. It's fast, loose, and nothing sticks for long. People blow in like tumbleweeds, chasing fortunes they barely understand, and leave just as fast, if they're lucky enough to leave at all. Outside town, miners hack at the earth in silver and gold claims, their lungs filling with dust and hopes turning to gravel. Boomtowns spring up overnight, wooden shacks, tents, and a general store if you're lucky. But the moment the mine dries up, the whole town dries up with it. Whole communities disappear in a month, leaving behind only empty whiskey bottles and broken dreams. If you're too slow, you're left behind with them. Quirky detail? Outlaws actually send press releases. No kidding. Some bandits leave signed notes at the scene of a robbery, proudly taking credit and even criticising the victim's taste in boots. You hear about a man called Black Bart who robs stagecoaches and leaves behind poetry. Another, Cherokee Bill, is known as much for his bad attitude as for his shooting. And yet, most of the real danger doesn't come from the dramatic shootouts. Those are rare. The real danger is boredom, disease, bad water, and bad company. You ride out with a cattle drive for a few days just to see what it's like. It's not romantic. It's hot. It's dusty. And it smells like 1,000 cows moving slowly in a cloud of flies. Cowboys sleep under the stars, eat beans and biscuits for days, and spend more time fixing saddle sores than firing revolvers. Most of them are teenagers, freedmen, or Mexican vaqueros, none of whom will ever end up in a dime novel. And if you get thrown from your horse, there's no backup plan, just dust and pain. Speaking of dime novels, they're huge right now. Sold at train stations and general stores, they tell thrilling and mostly fake tales of heroism in the West. Brave cowboys, noble sheriffs, and deadly duels at high noon. You pick one up and can't help but laugh. The real West doesn't smell like gunpowder and glory. It smells like outhouses and ambition. But people eat these stories up anyway. Why? Because they want to believe there's still a place where freedom means no rules and every man carves his own fate into the landscape. That belief is part of the problem, of course. With every new wave of settlers and would-be legends, more land is taken, more treaties ignored, more towns pushed into sacred or stolen ground. You hear gunfire one night, maybe a drunken dispute. Maybe another skirmish between ranchers and the remnants of a native tribe trying to hold on to what's left. You stay in your bunk and wait for it to end. The frontier may be open, but it's also bleeding. Scholars debate whether the Wild West ever really existed the way we think it did. Was it a land of rugged individuals and boundless opportunity, or just a chaotic vacuum where power flowed to the most ruthless? One thing's clear, the West of the 1880s is not a myth. It's real, it's raw, and it will chew you up if you're not careful. You leave town on foot, dust in your boots and a few coins lighter. A man tips his hat to you as you pass. Might have been a gambler, might have been a preacher, might have been both. That's the West for you. Nothing is what it seems, and everyone has at least two names. The train whistles again, far off in the distance, reminding you that the world doesn't stop, even out here. You head toward the sound, boots dragging through the dirt, one eye on the horizon, the other on your back. You make it out of the Wild West in one piece somehow, and as the train pulls you back toward the cities, you think maybe, just maybe, you've survived the worst of it. Then your throat starts to itch, just a little tickle, then your head aches, and your joints start to ache, and suddenly you're sweating through your clothes and wondering if that guy coughing behind you on the train last night had something worse than a hangover. Because here's the truth no one really tells you about the 1880s. If you get sick, you're basically rolling the dice with the Grim Reaper and hoping he's too busy to notice. Welcome to 19th century medicine, a world where bleeding, blistering and praying are still considered viable treatment plans. You stagger off the train and stumble your way into a doctor's office, which is really just the back room of a general store with a cot, a bottle of whiskey, and a man in a dusty frock coat who smells faintly of carbolic acid and overconfidence. He pokes you with a thermometer that's never been cleaned, examines your tongue under a flickering oil lamp and confidently declares, "Probably a fever." You could have told him that. He recommends a tonic, something with quinine, mercury or heroin in it depending on the day, and tells you to get some rest. You cough so hard your ribs ache, and he slaps a mustard plaster on your chest, wraps you in wool blankets and mutters something about your humours being out of balance. Then he hands you a little bottle of laudanum. "It'll help with the pain," he says. You don't know it yet, but you've just been handed pure opium. Hospitals exist, sure, but they're not places you want to go unless you're really out of options. If you're poor, you might get a spot in a charity ward, where 10 to 15 patients share one room. A single nurse tries to manage all of them, and the word sterile hasn't quite entered the medical vocabulary. Surgeons operate with bare hands and aprons soaked in last week's blood. If you're lucky, they'll wash the instruments. If you're not, well, they might use the same saw for 3 amputations in a row. You meet a nurse named Clara. No, not that Clara, but she's tough, no nonsense, and working with what she's got. She tells you flat out, if you want to live, drink water that's been boiled, don't trust quacks, and stay away from meat that smells even slightly funny. You immediately remember the street sausage you ate 2 days ago, and break into a fresh sweat. Then there's the pharmacy, if you can call it that. Shelves of colourful bottles promise everything from eternal youth to relief from female hysteria. You read labels offering cures for nervous disorders, brain fatigue, melancholia, and excessive self-abuse. You don't want to ask. Spoiler, most of it is alcohol, opium or cocaine, with a dash of sugar and snake oil. If it doesn't cure you, at least you won't care for a while. Quirky fact, Coca-Cola is invented around this time and marketed as a health tonic. It originally contains, you guessed it, cocaine. People drink it to treat headaches, anxiety and general lethargy. You try a glass and feel like you could outrun a steam engine. Side effects? Don't ask. And it's not just about you. Public health is still in the experimental phase. Germ theory is gaining traction, but many doctors still believe diseases spread through miasmas, bad air, or from imbalances in bodily fluids. That's why people burn sulphur in rooms, hang camphor around their necks, or wear wool socks soaked in vinegar. You meet a woman who swears her son survived typhoid because she tied a live chicken to his feet. She is absolutely serious. You take a walk through a tenement neighbourhood just to get some air. Mistake. Open drains run through the streets. Garbage piles up in alleyways. Children play barefoot next to dead rats. Cholera and typhus outbreaks aren't rare, they're expected. You hear about a family that lost 5 kids in 1 week. No funeral, just quiet burials and a new tenant moved into the room by morning. Disease doesn't discriminate, but poverty makes you an easier target. Wealthier folks have slightly better odds. They can afford private doctors, cleaner homes, and food that hasn't spent 3 days sweating in the sun. Still, even the rich aren't immune. Consumption, what we now call tuberculosis, affects everyone. So does diphtheria, scarlet fever, smallpox, and the all-purpose egg, which seems to describe anything from the flu to malaria. You learn quickly that living through your 30s is an accomplishment. There's one bright spot: midwives. Often women from immigrant or African American communities, midwives provide far better maternal care than most male doctors. They know how to deliver babies safely, how to treat infections with herbs, how to keep mothers from bleeding out. But they're being pushed aside by the emerging medical establishment, which labels them unscientific, even as it kills more women with modern methods. You watch one young mother survive childbirth thanks to the steady hands of an old Irish midwife. Later that week, her neighbour dies in a hospital from the same delivery. Historians still debate the state of medicine in this era. Was it a time of progress, with breakthroughs like anaesthesia and antiseptic practices slowly taking hold? Or was it still a medieval guessing game wrapped in fancy packaging? Both views have truth. It was a bridge, a shaky, splintered bridge between superstition and science. And while some strides were being made for most people, healthcare still came down to luck, superstition, and whether the doctor had steady hands. Eventually your fever breaks. Maybe it was the laudanum, maybe it was rest, maybe it was sheer spite. You step back out into the street thinner, shakier, and far more cautious. A small child runs past you, sneezing violently into the open air. You sidestep them like they're carrying the plague, because they might be. You head toward the nearest public pump, draw a glass of water, sniff it, and pour it out just to be safe. In the 1880s, being healthy isn't about wellness routines or morning yoga. It's about survival and a strong stomach. You recover just in time to visit a different world entirely, one that sits above the grime, above the noise, above the coughing street vendors and their coal-dusted coin jars. Today, you're stepping inside a Gilded Age mansion. Think velvet, chandeliers, and more mirrors than a carnival funhouse. You're not quite sure how you got the invitation. Maybe someone mistook you for a minor Vanderbilt cousin or a well-dressed houseplant. But you're not asking questions. You step through carved mahogany doors and into a fantasy wrapped in gold leaf and quiet condescension. Immediately the air changes. It smells like rosewater and old money. A butler in white gloves, who somehow manages to look both bored and judgmental, takes your coat with a nod so slight it could be mistaken for a muscle spasm. The foyer alone could house 6 of the tenement apartments you've seen. Marble floors, stained glass windows, gas chandeliers dripping with crystals. It's not just wealth, it's theatrical, and it's all brand new. These elites are not old European aristocracy. They're self-made, or at least they say they are. Railroad money, steel money, banking money, earned fast, spent faster. Your hostess appears. Her dress shimmers with beads hand-stitched in Paris. Her corset is pulled so tight her waist could double as a hat rack. She glides toward you, offers a practiced smile, and leads you through a salon stuffed with velvet divans, hand-painted porcelain, and enough imported art to furnish a mid-size museum. Somewhere in the distance, someone is playing Chopin on a grand piano they probably haven't practiced on since last winter. This isn't just about luxury, it's about display. The Gilded Age elite are obsessed with showing off. Everything must scream refinement, taste, and I'm richer than you. The dining room is set for 20 with 12 forks per plate and enough silverware to perform minor surgery. Dinner is an event, 12 courses, each smaller than your average snack, including delicacies like squab, turtle soup and aspic moulded into unholy geometric shapes. No one actually finishes anything. That would be uncouth. The wine flows freely. The conversation floats somewhere between politics, opera, and who got blackballed from the Metropolitan Club last week. You make eye contact with a man in a diamond-studded cravat who looks like he's never had to butter his own bread. He tells you he just returned from Newport, where he built a modest summer cottage, which turns out to be a 70-room palace overlooking the ocean. His wife complains that her lady's maid keeps forgetting the difference between the teaspoons and the ice cream spoons. You nod sympathetically while trying to remember what ice cream even tastes like when it isn't half melted and sold from a pushcart. After dinner, you wander through the house. There's a ballroom with frescoed ceilings and gilded cornices, a smoking room with Turkish carpets and ivory chess sets, and a library filled with books so pristine you wonder if anyone's ever cracked them open. Servants drift through like ghosts, clearing plates, lighting lamps, vanishing before you can ask for anything. You pass by a nursery larger than the entire boarding house you once lived in, where 2 golden-haired children are being read to by a governess with a French accent and a spine made of steel. And yet, behind the satin and splendour, something feels hollow. You overhear whispers, scandals, lawsuits, social snubs. A woman complains that she's not quite in the inner circle because her husband made his money in mining instead of railroads. Another sighs dramatically about the stress of hiring a competent butler who doesn't steal cigars. These people live like royalty, but without titles, they're constantly scrambling to prove they belong. It's wealth insecurity in high society. You can almost hear the anxiety humming under the polished mahogany. Quirky truth? These elites throw costume balls so elaborate they make Versailles look understated. One heiress famously dressed as electric light, with a working battery-powered bulb on her head. Others came as cats, planets, Greek gods, or even battleships. It's not subtle, it's not meant to be. The goal is to outdo, outshine, and outspend everyone else in the room. But the contrast is jarring. Just a few blocks away, families are sleeping 5 to a room, eating boiled cabbage and praying they don't get evicted. You realise the servants here, maids, footmen, scullery workers, live in basement quarters so cramped they make tenements look roomy. Their hours, sunrise to long after midnight. Their wages, pitiful. Their days off, practically non-existent. And yet, they're invisible in this world, seen only when needed, spoken to only in directives. You speak with one of them, a housemaid named Nora. She's 17 from Ireland and hasn't seen her family since she boarded a ship 2 years ago. Her hands are raw from scrubbing marble floors. Her eyes never stop moving. If you drop a plate, she says, you're out. And not just from the job, from the house, right into the street. She smiles when she says it, but her voice is edged with exhaustion. Historians debate whether these industrial magnates were truly generous patrons of the arts, or just status-obsessed social climbers. Some point to the museums, libraries, and universities they funded. Carnegie Hall, the Morgan Library, the Met. Others argue it was all a PR stunt, a thin gold veneer to distract from the labour they exploited and the monopolies they rigged. The truth, of course, lives somewhere in the glittering, uncomfortable middle. As the evening winds down, a string quartet plays softly from a raised platform while guests float in and out of the parlour. You sip champagne that costs more than a week's wages and look around at the painted smiles and practiced laughter. This is the good life, or at least one version of it. But it's built on a foundation that creaks when you listen closely. You step outside onto the balcony, cool night air on your face, and stare out over a city that sparkles with gaslights and secrets. You wonder how long this golden shell can hold before it cracks. You leave the mansion in the early morning haze, feeling like you've just stepped out of a museum that's still pretending to be alive. The cobblestones are damp, and the lamplighters are finishing their rounds. As the city yawns awake, you find yourself walking toward a low brick building with tall windows and a dull bell clanging out front. It's a schoolhouse, public, modest, and already filling with the shuffling feet of reluctant students. Today you're going back to school, 1880s style, and let's be clear from the jump. There's no recess, no participation trophies, and no getting away with chewing gum in class. Not that you could afford gum anyway. Inside, the room smells like chalk dust, coal smoke, and boiled wool. The walls are bare except for a large American flag, a portrait of George Washington, and a map so outdated it still shows Indian Territory in bold, proud letters. Desks are lined up in precise rows, wooden, tiny, and built to punish your spine. Each one comes with an inkwell and a chance to develop lifelong resentment toward cursive. The teacher is a woman in her late 20s, hair pinned so tightly it probably whistles in the wind. Her name is Miss Templeton, and she's the kind of figure who can silence a room with a single raised eyebrow. She's got a pointer stick and she knows how to use it, not just for the blackboard, but for knuckles. Discipline here is not a joke. Talking out of turn, daydreaming, or, heaven forbid, spelling arithmetic with an extra E could earn you a public scolding, a seat in the corner with the dunce cap, or a good whack across the palm. Enlightenment through fear. You're seated next to a 10-year-old who smells like coal smoke and cabbage. He works half days in a factory and only comes to school in the mornings because his mother insists it might make him more than just bones and boots. A few of the older boys are already pushing 15 and have calloused hands from farm work. There's a girl in the back row who's 15 too, but she's married, and this is probably her last year before she has to drop out and start having children. Everyone sits bolt upright, slates ready, chalk in hand. The day begins with recitation. Everyone stands and recites the Lord's Prayer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, though it's a bit different from the version you know. Then come drills, spelling, arithmetic, penmanship. Reading from the McGuffey Reader, a charming little book full of moral tales and absolutely no room for interpretation. If you're lucky, the teacher reads aloud a poem by Longfellow, before diving into grammar rules so rigid they make you question every sentence you've ever spoken. And it's not just the subjects that are rigid. The rules of behaviour are written in stone. No speaking unless spoken to. No fidgeting. No slouching. No showing up late. Ever. Girls must curtsy when called upon. Boys must stand straight and remove their caps indoors. And if your family doesn't provide firewood for the stove in winter, well, you'll just freeze with the rest of the class. Communal suffering builds character. Quirky detail: if you're a left-handed student, you're out of luck. The left hand is the devil's hand, and teachers are fully prepared to whack it until you become right-handed through sheer trauma. You watch one poor kid try to sneak his pencil into his left fist. It does not go well. Despite all this, the schoolroom isn't entirely joyless. You catch a few stolen grins, a secret paper note passed between desks, a chalk drawing on the blackboard when the teacher's back is turned. There's something beautiful in the effort. The idea that learning is worth fighting for, even in stiff clothes on an empty stomach. The textbooks are hand-me-downs, the ink smells metallic and sour, and you're not convinced anyone's learning algebra correctly, but still, there's a kind of hope here. Of course, this isn't a universal experience. Rural schools might meet only a few months a year, depending on the harvest. Some kids walk 5 miles each way in all weather, just for a few hours of learning. In cities, classrooms are overcrowded with 60 or more students per teacher. Some children attend school for a year, maybe 2. Others never learn to read at all. Education in the 1880s is as uneven as the streets outside, and it's not remotely equal. Black students attend separate schools, if they're allowed to attend at all. In many southern states, school funding for black children is laughably low, if it exists. You hear about one schoolhouse built from scrap wood, with a leaking roof and no books, where a single teacher instructs all grades at once. And yet, the students show up day after day, eager to learn. That eagerness is often met with suspicion or outright hostility by the local white population. Native children, meanwhile, are being forced into boarding schools where the goal is not education, but erasure. Their languages are banned, their hair is cut, their culture is treated as a disease to be cured. You read a newspaper headline boasting about how many Indians are now reading Shakespeare. No mention of what they lost in the process. Scholars continue to debate whether the 1880s marked true progress in public education, or just a new way to enforce conformity. Was it a stepping stone to mass literacy, or a means of shaping obedient factory workers and morally upright citizens who wouldn't question the status quo? Maybe it was both. The system was growing, yes, but slowly, and only for some. Back in Miss Templeton's room, the day ends with one final spelling quiz and a solemn reminder to memorise a poem for Monday. As the bell rings, students file out in pairs, buttoning their coats and adjusting their caps. You linger a moment, watching the dust dance in a shaft of late afternoon sun. A girl picks up a dropped chalk nub and tucks it into her apron pocket like treasure. Education may be strict, punishing, even unfair, but to her it's still magic. You walk outside, ears ringing with verses and multiplication tables, and see the world a little differently. Not because of what you learned today, but because you remembered that not everyone gets the chance. You leave the schoolhouse as your stomach gives a loud, accusing growl, clearly unimpressed by hours of moral instruction and chalk dust. It's time to eat, or at least to try. You wander through the city streets, following the scent of frying fat and fresh bread, weaving through vendors shouting over each other in 6 different languages, all promising the best sausage, the freshest pretzels, the most unbeatable deal on a mystery meat sandwich. It's 1880s America, and the food scene is, well, eclectic. Let's start with what you're most likely to find on a working class table. Potatoes, bread, more potatoes, and something pickled. Maybe a cabbage, if you're feeling fancy. You stop by a street cart where a woman with soot-streaked hands scoops thick stew into a tin bowl. It's mostly turnips and barley, with a bone or two for flavour. She calls it hash, but it looks like it's been rehashed about 5 times. Still, it's warm, and that counts for a lot. In immigrant neighbourhoods, each culture brings its own twist to survival food. The Italians offer garlicky pastas, soups and strong coffee, served in chipped porcelain cups. The Germans bring bratwurst and sauerkraut, sometimes cooked up in massive iron pots right on the sidewalk. Irish families rely on boiled dinners, cabbage, carrots, and whatever meat is cheapest. You spot a Polish bakery where babka and rye bread sit stacked like edible bricks behind fogged-up windows. And in the Jewish quarter, you find bagels so dense they could stop a bullet paired with pickled herring that's aggressively fragrant. Eating out, if you can afford it, opens another chapter. You duck into a working-class tavern around lunchtime and order the daily special. It arrives quickly. Greyish roast beef with watery gravy, mashed potatoes you could spackle a wall with, and a slice of bread that tastes suspiciously like last week's slice of bread. There's no ice in your water, it hasn't caught on yet, and you're definitely not getting dessert unless you count the stray raisin hiding in the bread. But if you climb the social ladder a bit, things change fast. Wealthy families dine in elaborate rituals, multi-course meals with absurd dishes like mock turtle soup, don't ask, jellied meat, and oysters served 3 ways. Aspic, that jiggly gelatin mould beloved by the Gilded Age elite, shows up on nearly every fancy table. It's used to encase everything from fish to vegetables to entire chickens. Why? Because nothing says luxury like meat jello, apparently. Quirky fact. Ketchup. Yes, the red stuff. Started out as a fermented fish sauce and didn't become a tomato-based condiment until the mid-1800s. By the 1880s, it's marketed as both a table sauce and, strangely enough, a health tonic. You're told it can improve digestion and fortify the blood, which makes you question every hot dog you've ever eaten. Desserts are where things briefly start to make sense. Pies are everywhere. Apple, rhubarb, cherry, mincemeat if you're brave. Cakes are heavy, rich, and made with lard if butter's out of reach. You buy a slice of molasses cake from a boy with a basket slung over his shoulder. It's sweet, dense, and tastes like someone poured a syrupy blizzard into a brick. You love it. But food isn't just food. It's politics, it's class, it's identity. You watch immigrant families get mocked for their garlic and spices, while upper-class cookbooks suddenly discover those same ingredients and declare them sophisticated. The same people who wrinkle their noses at a Jewish family's gefilte fish will turn around and serve caviar with champagne next week. It's a kind of culinary gaslighting, and it's everywhere. You visit a butcher shop next just to see how the sausage is made. Figuratively and literally. The place is chaotic, loud, and vaguely threatening. Blood on the floor, hooks overhead, and cleavers swinging with alarming casualness. Sanitation laws are still in their infancy, which means cleanliness is a suggestion, not a requirement. Meat is displayed without refrigeration, and flies are just considered part of the customer experience. You decide right then and there to take a brief hiatus from pork. You ask about food preservation, and the butcher shrugs. Salt, smoke, pickling, or prayer. Iceboxes exist, but they're expensive, and ice delivery is unreliable. Canning is catching on, especially among soldiers, turned settlers and housewives desperate to stretch the harvest into February. But most people still live meal to meal, hoping today's stew doesn't kill them. You stop by a general store and browse the shelves. Flour in barrels, sugar sold by the scoop, eggs stacked without cartons, and coffee beans in burlap sacks. In the back corner, a few shelves of canned goods gleam like promises. Labels show peaches, sardines, and something called potted meat food product, which is as unappetizing as it sounds. But you grab a tin anyway. Desperation builds character. Scholars argue whether the 1880s marked the beginning of modern American food culture, or the last stand of regional traditional diets. With railroads connecting coast to coast, exotic foods, bananas from Central America, oranges from California, coffee from Brazil, start arriving in places that previously lived on potatoes and salt pork. But with this abundance comes inequality. Your experience of food depends almost entirely on where you live, how much you earn, and whether your culture is in vogue or being mocked in the papers. Dinner that night is a quiet affair. You sit in the corner of a boarding house kitchen, eating boiled beans and bread dipped in bacon grease. The woman who runs the place pours you a glass of warm milk and doesn't smile once. The room smells of overcooked onions and weary silence. Someone breaks the mood by pulling out a harmonica and playing a tune that makes no sense, and also makes perfect sense. Everyone chuckles, a baby cries, someone snores. You chew slowly, grateful for food that doesn't bite back. As you settle in for the night, belly full enough, you think about how much a single meal says about a person's place in the world. In the 1880s, food is more than sustenance. It's survival. It's status. It's how people keep culture alive, even when everything else is trying to erase it. You wake the next morning to the sound of bells, actual bells, ringing through the city streets from the top of a gleaming new building on a wide avenue. You shuffle out into the sunlight and find yourself standing in front of something that didn't exist just a decade or two ago. A department store. Massive, polished, and unapologetically opulent. This isn't just a shop. It's a temple to consumerism. A monument to the idea that buying things might, in fact, be the new American religion. The sign above the door reads, A.T. Stewart and Company or Marshall Fields or Wanamaker's, depending on where you are. They're all similar. Multi-story marvels of plate glass and iron, filled with everything a person could possibly want and even more things they absolutely don't need. You step inside and it hits you. The smell of perfume, the soft murmur of money-changing hands, the swish of petticoats across polished marble floors. For a moment it feels like you've entered another reality, one where nobody's sweating in a mine or coughing into a tenement pillow. Here it's all silk gloves, ivory hairbrushes, and cashmere dreams. You glance around at the crowd, women in smart hats and tailored jackets, each accompanied by a maid, a child, or an air of determined leisure. A few men browse the tobacco counter or the shaving supplies, but this is mostly a woman's kingdom. For the first time, respectable women can go out in public, alone or with friends, and have a destination that doesn't involve groceries or prayer. The department store is more than just a store. It's a stage for social performance, a space to see and be seen. You wander through the aisles, passing rows of corsets, parasols, boots, books, soaps, rugs, glassware, and something called a hair tonic for men of distinction. There's even a candy counter, its glass dome shining like a church reliquary, filled with caramels, lemon drops, and tiny pink sweets you can't identify, but feel compelled to buy. A saleswoman offers you a sample perfume card, delicately scented with something floral and mysterious. You sniff it and immediately feel richer than you actually are. And let's not ignore the technological magic happening here. Elevators, operated by uniformed attendants, carry customers between floors. Electric lights buzz gently overhead, still novel enough to seem miraculous. Even the cash system is high-tech. Cashiers use pneumatic tubes to send money and receipts, zipping through the walls with a satisfying whoosh. It feels like the future disguised as a shopping trip. Quirky fact. These stores didn't just sell products, they sold experiences. Some had orchestras playing in the lobby, others had art galleries, writing rooms, even nurseries where you could drop off your kid while you browsed for linen handkerchiefs. There were in-store cafes for ladies of taste to sip tea and delicately insult each other's shoes. You begin to understand, you're not just buying things here, you're buying an identity. Of course, behind the curtain, things look a little less polished. You peek into the service hallway and see young women, shop girls, moving quickly, carrying boxes, restocking shelves, checking inventory. Most are in their teens or early 20s. They stand all day, earn next to nothing, and are expected to be as pleasant and decorative as the window displays. Don't smile too much, one whispers to another, but don't frown either. They'll say you're ungrateful, a manager walks by, and both immediately straighten like they've swallowed a yardstick. Some shop girls dream of marrying a customer, usually someone with a moustache, a bank account, and a weakness for compliments. Others save every penny to help their families, sending half their paycheck back home in an envelope sealed with hope. And some simply survive, one long day at a time before heading back to a room they share with 3 other girls and a window that sticks shut. You make your way to the mezzanine where the truly absurd goods are kept. Elephant foot umbrella stands, ivory chess sets, gilded spittoons. If it can be gold-plated, someone here will gold-plate it and charge double. A salesman with pomaded hair and teeth too white to be trusted tries to sell you a set of imported peacock feathers for drawing room adornment. You nod solemnly, as if this has always been your plan. There's an undercurrent of tension to it all. You see women clutching price tags and calculating whether they can afford the ribbon and the new gloves. The dream is here, beautifully arranged and priced just out of reach. This is the beginning of aspirational consumerism, the kind where your worth is measured in thread count, your refinement in how well your handbag matches your hat. Scholars often point to the 1880s department store as a cultural pivot point. It's where the modern idea of the consumer is born, not just someone who needs things, but someone who expresses identity through wanting things. The rise of advertising during this era isn't a coincidence. Magazines, newspapers and catalogues flood homes with full-page spreads featuring pale, elegant women draped in satin, leaning thoughtfully on fainting couches. They don't just sell soap, they sell a fantasy of being cleaner, better, more beautiful. The tagline might as well be, "Buy this. Be worthy." You pick up a mail-order catalogue from Montgomery Ward, one of the earliest. It's a revelation. People out in the country can now flip through these pages, order almost anything by mail, and have it delivered to their door. Farming equipment, furniture, sewing machines, even fake hairpieces. The catalogue is thick, bold, and full of impossible promises, and for many, it's the only connection to the rapidly modernising world. Back outside, you notice something strange. The street suddenly feels duller, the smells sharper, the noise louder. The gleam of the department store fades the second the glass doors shut behind you. You pass a ragged man selling apples from a crate. A mother argues with a butcher over the price of scraps. Two boys chase each other through a pile of horse manure, and you realise, inside that store, the world felt different not because it was different, but because it was designed to convince you it could be. Still holding your little paper sample of perfume, you tuck it into your pocket and walk away, half tempted to believe it. That's the power of the 1880s department store. It doesn't just sell you goods, it sells you the illusion of possibility. You spend the rest of the day wandering, letting the buzz of the city carry you forward like a leaf in the current. When night falls, the streets don't empty, they transform. Gas lamps flicker to life, shadows stretch across the alleys, and the city exhales its daytime tension into something more relaxed, unpredictable, and a little bit rowdy. You've survived another day in the 1880s, and now it's time to play. But remember, there's no streaming, no radio, no TikTok, and no just chilling in your flannel pyjamas with a bag of chips. Entertainment in this era is a whole different beast. If you want to be amused, you have to leave the house, show up in person, and probably get elbowed in the ribs by a stranger with questionable hygiene. Your first stop is a vaudeville theatre, nestled between a cigar shop and a boarding house that may or may not be entirely legal. The building leans slightly, as if it's already had one too many. You buy a cheap ticket, the peanut gallery naturally, and climb up a narrow staircase to a crowded balcony that smells like sweat, popcorn, and second-hand dreams. Below you, the stage is framed by heavy red curtains, and the house band, 3 exhausted men and a piano held together with twine, tunes up with the enthusiasm of a hangover. Then the show begins. Vaudeville is part circus, part sketch comedy, part fever dream. You get singers, dancers, ventriloquists, acrobats, comedians, trained dogs, and one guy who juggles meat cleavers while reciting Shakespeare. The acts come fast, sometimes brilliant, sometimes disastrous. A man in checkered pants slips on a banana peel and the audience howls like it's the funniest thing they've ever seen. A child soprano belts out the Star-Spangled Banner and people stand up mid-chew. Then there's a magician whose rabbit escapes mid-trick and causes a small riot in the second row. It's chaotic, it's crass, and it's absolutely captivating. Vaudeville is where everyone goes, rich, poor, immigrant, native-born, young, old. It's one of the only places in town where the crowd is this mixed, and somehow everyone agrees to laugh at the same ridiculous jokes. It's also the proving ground for performers who'll one day become legends. You might be watching the early days of a young Buster Keaton or Sophie Tucker without even realising it. But for now, they're just people hustling for applause and hoping to get booked again next week. After the show, you step back out into the street, ears still ringing. The city hums with nightlife. You hear ragtime piano echoing from a saloon, the clink of billiard balls in the back of a bar, and the unmistakable thump of someone getting tossed out of a gambling hall. If you've got money and nerve, there's always more entertainment to find, and not all of it comes with a ticket stub. You follow the sound of laughter to a corner pub where a group of dock workers are drinking, shouting over each other, and occasionally bursting into off-key renditions of folk songs from the old country. The bartender is part therapist, part referee. He slaps down mugs of beer with practiced indifference, and occasionally warns someone with a raised eyebrow to cool it. You nurse a glass of something brown and burny, and realise this is a different kind of show. Raw, unrehearsed, and soaked in alcohol. The stories are exaggerated, the gestures wild, and every insult is both affectionate and slightly dangerous. Then there's the music. Not fancy concert hall music, though those exist too if you want to dress up and pretend you understand Wagner. This is street music, barroom ballads, and parlour piano tunes. Ragtime is taking off, especially in places like St. Louis and New Orleans, where syncopated rhythms twist the rules of classical music into something alive, rebellious, and impossible to ignore. You catch a glimpse of a young black pianist hammering out a tune that makes the room sit up straighter, and then lean forward with giddy anticipation. It's fresh, raw, and a little bit scandalous. Quirky fact: people are obsessed with seances and spirit photography. After the Civil War, a wave of grief turned into a full-blown fascination with the supernatural. On weekends, you can attend a seance led by a medium who claims to channel the dead, complete with table wrapping, ectoplasm, and a flickering candle that may or may not be affected by a hidden wire. If you've got the money and the gullibility, you can even get your picture taken with a spirit hovering behind you. A ghostly blur added in the dark room for an extra fee. For those without the cash for theatres or seances, there are always dime novels, cheap, sensational, and wildly popular. You buy one for a nickel at a corner stall, Deadeye Dick's Revenge on Bandit Hill. The cover art is absurd, the story more so. It features shootouts, lost gold, a kidnapped schoolmarm, and a bear for no apparent reason. It's glorious trash, and you love every word. These books are the Netflix of their day, mass-produced escape valves for overworked brains. Scholars argue about the role of entertainment in this era. Some say it was a form of distraction, a way to keep the working class pacified with jokes and spectacle. Others insist it was a vital form of expression, a way to push boundaries and create shared culture across ethnic and class divides. Maybe it's both. You can't help but feel that vaudeville sketch about a crooked politician said more about public sentiment than any newspaper editorial you've read lately. As the night wears on, you notice how much energy people pour into having fun, or pretending to. After 12-hour work days and 6-day work weeks, even a half-decent fiddle tune can feel like a small miracle. You see children skipping rope in the alley under the faint glow of a gas lamp, a pair of lovers arguing softly on a stoop, and an elderly man sitting by himself, puffing on a clay pipe, smiling at something only he remembers. Eventually the streets begin to quiet. The piano players tire out, the theatres close their doors, you head back to your boarding house, the dime novel tucked under your arm and the ghost of a ragtime melody stuck in your head. Your room is still tiny, still stuffy, but tonight it feels just a bit larger, like some of the colour and chaos from the outside world followed you in. You light a candle, crack open the window and think, maybe this world is louder, messier, and more human than you expected, and maybe that's the point. In the 1880s, entertainment isn't just about escape, it's about endurance. It's about laughing at the absurdity of it all and then getting up the next day to do it all over again. It's just after dawn when the screams wake you. Not terrified screams, just angry, guttural, very much not before coffee screams echoing down the alley outside your window. You peek through the shutters and see two men wrestling in the mud, one yelling something about a stolen watch, the other insisting he hasn't touched anything but his own shoes. A small crowd forms almost immediately. No one steps in. No one calls for help. Because in the 1880s, if you get robbed, beaten or worse, there's a good chance you'll be handling the situation yourself. Welcome to crime and policing in Gilded Age America. Equal parts improvisation, suspicion, and very bad odds. You head outside to see what's left of the scene. The watch is gone, so is the accused. A few people chuckle and shuffle away. A kid picks up a dropped shoe and runs off with it like he just won a prize. You ask someone if the police will come. They laugh and say, maybe tomorrow, maybe never. In this neighbourhood, law enforcement isn't so much a presence as a rumour. You finally do spot a policeman later that day. He's round, red-faced and strolling casually like he's trying not to sweat through his uniform. He carries a nightstick, not a gun, and he's more focused on tipping his hat to passing women than investigating anything. That's not uncommon. Police forces in the 1880s are still evolving from their earlier form as night watchmen and political muscle. Some are honest, many are not. Corruption is so common, it's practically part of the job description. Want a cop to lose a report? Slide a few coins into the right palm? Want a criminal charge dropped? Know a councilman. Most cities operate on a patronage system. Politicians appoint police officers as favours, often to loyal voters or ethnic allies. In some precincts, this means your neighbourhood is patrolled by someone who grew up 2 blocks away and still owes your cousin money. In others, it means you never see the police unless they're collecting bribes or breaking up a labour strike with their batons. Crime itself is as varied as the people who commit it. Petty theft is rampant. Pockets are picked. Bread is stolen. You meet a boy no older than 10 who boosts apples from carts and sells them back to unsuspecting vendors 2 streets over. He tells you with a grin, "I'm a businessman." Then there are the con men, swindlers and bunco artists. Slick-haired charmers who can talk a person out of their money, watch and dignity before breakfast. Some pose as travelling salesmen, others claim to be foreign nobility. All of them are lying. Then there's the darker side. Gangs form in the worst slums made up of orphans, immigrants and angry young men with nothing to lose. In New York you hear about the Weos, the 5 Points Gang, the Dead Rabbits. Their names sound ridiculous, but their actions aren't. Turf wars, beatings, knife fights, it's part of the landscape in certain parts of town. If you survive to your 20s with all your teeth, you're considered lucky, quirky fact. Mugshots are a brand new invention. Some forward-thinking precincts have started photographing repeat offenders and organising the pictures into albums, early versions of criminal databases. You see one and it's almost comical. Men with thick moustaches, women in lacy blouses, all staring blankly into the camera like they're posing for a family portrait at gunpoint. What doesn't exist yet is forensic science. No fingerprints, no DNA, no blood typing. If someone commits a murder and doesn't get caught in the act, the investigation comes down to witnesses, guesswork, or whether the detective had breakfast that day. That's why so many crimes go unsolved, or worse, pinned on the wrong person. You read about a man imprisoned for murder based on nothing but a vague description, and a hat that looked familiar. The real killer was never found. You talk to a night watchman outside a meatpacking plant. He's got a scar across his nose and a voice like gravel. He says the best way to stay safe is to look like someone not worth stabbing. Then he laughs, offers you a cigarette and tells you about the time he wrestled a thief with one hand while eating a sandwich with the other. You can't tell if he's exaggerating, but you decide not to test him. Brothels, gambling dens and opium houses are technically illegal, but they thrive with the right bribes and the right clientele. Some are even operated with the quiet blessing of city officials who enjoy a little after-hours entertainment themselves. You hear about a brothel in Chicago where the mayor has his own private room, a gambling hall in San Francisco with lawman's night. Everyone's breaking rules, but only some get caught. And the punishments? They're not what you'd expect. Jail time is unevenly handed out. Fines are more common, especially for minor offences. But prisons, when you do end up in one, are brutal, overcrowded and often more dangerous than the streets. Disease spreads fast. Food is worse than what's served to livestock. Guards are underpaid and over-brutal. Reform is a word people throw around without any intention of doing anything about it. There's a growing movement to change things. A few progressive voices are calling for professionalised police, proper training, less corruption, and, gasp, actual investigation methods. Some cities are experimenting with new tactics, mounted patrols, beat assignments, even whistle codes. But it's early days. You can feel the gears trying to turn, but they're rusted, jammed and groaning under the weight of habit and politics. Scholars still argue about crime in the 1880s. Was it really worse, or just more visible? Some say sensationalist newspapers created a moral panic. Others insist urbanisation and poverty turned cities into breeding grounds for violence. The truth, as usual, floats somewhere in the middle. Crime exists where desperation and opportunity overlap, and the Gilded Age has plenty of both. As the sun sets, you pass a police station with its doors half open. Inside, a man shouts about his innocence while a cop drinks coffee and pretends not to hear. Across the street, a woman screams for help while bystanders turn away. You stand there, unsure of whether to intervene, unsure if anyone would back you up if you did. In the 1880s, justice isn't blind. It's busy, underfunded, and sometimes just looking the other way. The next morning you wake up to something that feels eerily familiar. Panic in the headlines, rumours in the street, and neighbours whispering about banks failing left and right. Welcome to the panic of 1884, a financial crisis with all the subtlety of a horse-drawn wagon smashing through your front window. You don't even have time to button your collar before you hear it. A man shouting outside the nearest bank, pounding on the locked doors, demanding his savings back. Spoiler alert, he's not getting them. It started like so many economic disasters do, quietly, then all at once. A few big Wall Street firms made too many bad bets. One bank failed, then another. Then the New York Marine National Bank, once a cornerstone of finance, collapsed like a house of cards made of IOUs and wishful thinking. Suddenly everyone's on edge. People line up outside banks, clutching passbooks and praying their money is still real. Many won't even make it to the counter before the windows are shuttered for good. You rush to the nearest financial institution to see the chaos firsthand. Men in bowler hats and waistcoats crowd the steps, shouting over each other. Some demand gold coins instead of paper bills. Others try to withdraw everything they have, only to learn that everything is now nothing. A bank clerk, pale and sweating, slips out the side door like he's just abandoned ship. You ask a man in the crowd what happened. He shrugs. Some rich fool got greedy. Now the rest of us get to starve. That's the general consensus, and he's not wrong. This isn't just about Wall Street. The panic trickles down fast, like tar, thick and suffocating. Small businesses can't get loans. Factories start closing. Railroads cut back on expansion. Suddenly, people are out of work, out of credit, and out of luck. You visit a local textile mill the day after their largest investor goes belly up. The foreman gathers everyone, clears his throat and says, "That's it, we're done." No severance, no final paycheck, just a handshake and a door slammed shut. One woman bursts into tears. A young man mutters something about heading west, maybe striking it rich. Most just stand there stunned. You don't realise it until later, but this is happening all over the country. It's a slow-motion collapse and nobody really knows where the bottom is. You meet a baker who starts baking bread with less yeast and more sawdust, literally, to stretch his supplies. You see a newsboy get mugged for a nickel. You pass by a soup kitchen line that wraps around the block. You stand in it too, just to get a sense of the weight. The man behind you says he used to be a bookkeeper. The woman in front of you used to have a house with curtains. Now she's clutching a chipped bowl and hoping there's still stew left when she gets to the front. Quirky footnote. People start hoarding coins in their mattresses. Literally. You meet a barber who refuses to accept paper money because he's convinced it'll be worthless by next week. He demands silver coin only. Hard money, he grumbles. Stuff that clinks. His paranoia seems extreme until you see a nearby grocery store with a handwritten sign. No credit. No exceptions. We're not a bank. The newspapers, ever helpful, fuel the hysteria. Sensational headlines scream about the death of American confidence. Editorials blame the usual suspects. Greedy bankers, corrupt politicians, foreign gold speculators, immigrant labourers, the weather. Everyone's pointing fingers. No one's offering solutions. You read one editorial claiming this is just the free market correcting itself. You imagine correcting yourself straight into homelessness. Meanwhile, the rich? Most of them ride it out just fine. A few lose money on paper. Some go bankrupt and still manage to host dinner parties by the following month. You attend one such party, purely for research, and overhear a railroad baron joking about tightening the belt. His wife says she may have to cancel her trip to Paris. You sip punch and pretend to care while remembering the man you saw eating from a trash bin that morning. In the midst of it all, a few institutions try to hold the line. The New York Clearinghouse organises emergency lending between banks, trying to keep some of the larger ones afloat. A few prominent businessmen pool their resources to calm the market. But for the average person, those efforts are invisible. What you see are closed storefronts, pawn shops overflowing with wedding rings and heirlooms, and once proud workers standing in bread lines like ghosts of themselves. Historians still argue about how severe the Panic of 1884 really was. Some say it was a contained event, mainly affecting financial centres. Others argue it triggered a ripple effect that wrecked communities across the country. What's undeniable is how fragile the economy was, how a few cracks at the top could cause an avalanche at the bottom. You walk through a neighbourhood that's gone quiet. Too quiet. Half the shops are closed. A once bustling printworks now stands dark. A man hammers a foreclosure notice into a doorframe, while a family inside silently watches through lace curtains. No one says anything. What's left to say? That night you meet a group of laid-off workers sitting on crates around a barrel fire. They share a flask, a harmonica, and stories about jobs they used to have. One man jokes that he's going to open a bank himself, one that gives loans to the banks. Another mutters, maybe it's time we stop waiting for things to get better and start making them better. Everyone nods. It's quiet, but the kind of quiet that could turn into something else. Revolution? Maybe not yet, but the idea has entered the room. You head home with the sound of the fire crackling in your ears and a sense that things might never go back to normal. Not the way they were, and maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Cracks let in light, and a lot of people are starting to look around and realise they're not alone. You follow the railway west again, but this time not as a curious traveller. Now you're chasing something. Work, a fresh start, the whisper of silver in the hills and fortune in the dirt. It's the kind of move people make when everything else has crumbled. You're not alone. The 1880s are full of people on the move. Immigrants, labourers, drifters, dreamers, and desperate men who just lost everything in a bank collapse and can't look their children in the eyes. The newspapers talk about boomtowns springing up overnight, and that's exactly where you're headed. Silver's been found in Colorado, and the stampede is already underway. You arrive in Leadville, Colorado, so new it still smells like sawdust and ambition. Wooden sidewalks creak under your boots. Miners stream through the muddy streets with pickaxes slung over their shoulders and layers of grime on their faces. There's a saloon every 100 feet, each with a different piano player and a bartender who looks like he's seen 3 murders this week and expects to see a 4th by Friday. The town pulses with energy. The promise is simple. Silver in the ground, dollars in your pocket, but the reality, that's less shiny. You sign on with a mining crew for the midnight shift, and before your first hour underground, you're already regretting everything. The mine is a damp, choking maze of timber beams, echoing shouts, and the constant sound of dripping water and metal on rock. You're handed a candle stub and told not to drop it. That's your light, your lifeline, and your last hope, someone says, only half joking. You swing a pickaxe until your hands go numb. The air tastes like dust and sweat and something sour you can't name. Your back screams, your head throbs, and always, the whisper of cave-ins or bad dynamite in the back of your mind. Miners die here, all the time. A cracked beam, a misfire, a pocket of gas, and that's it. No warning, no obituary, just a new guy in your bunk by sundown. The pay? It's not great. You get a few dollars a week, and most of that goes right back to the company-owned boarding house, the company store, and the company saloon, where you drink just enough to sleep through the pain. You quickly realise you're not just working in the mine, you're trapped in a miniature economy built entirely to keep you treading water until you drown. Still, people come. Every day more men arrive, young, old, reckless, hopeful. Some bring families, others bring nothing but the shirt on their backs and a pickaxe borrowed from a cousin. You hear a dozen different languages in the mess tent. Norwegians, Cornishmen, Irish, Slavs, Mexicans, black miners from the south trying to outrun Jim Crow. Everyone's here for the same reason. The silver, or gold, or copper, or whatever might get them out of poverty and into a pair of shoes that doesn't leak. You meet a man named Hector, a veteran of 3 different boomtowns and 0 fortunes. He tells you the town is like a fire. It burns hot, burns fast, and then it leaves ash. You just have to hope you're not still standing in the middle when it dies. He says it with a grin, but his eyes are tired. His fingers shake when he pours coffee. He still goes down into the mine every night, though, because what else is there? And then, just as quickly as the boom started, the vein runs dry. One mine closes, then another. The price of silver drops just enough to panic the investors back east. You can feel it shift in the air. Wages shrink, shops close, men leave in the night. By the end of the month, the once roaring town is half empty. You walk down the same main street, and it's quieter now, like someone turned the volume knob down on a life you were just starting to understand. That's the cycle of the boomtown. Hope, sweat, desperation, collapse. Rinse, repeat. You hear about another strike in Arizona. Copper this time, or maybe gold in the Yukon, or zinc. It doesn't matter. People will chase the next dream just like they chased this one, until it chokes them. Quirky detail. Entire towns have vanished almost overnight. Real towns, with churches, post offices and newspapers. One day, they're booming. The next, ghost towns. You find a newspaper clipping about a place called Garnet, Montana, once home to 1,000 souls. Now, just wind and wooden frames. Some are even left with the table still set, coffee cups half full, as if everyone just stood up and walked away mid-breakfast. You sit on the edge of town with what's left of the crew, boots muddy, hands blistered, and watch the sun dip behind the mountains. A harmonica whines. Someone passes a bottle. You realise you're not sad that it's over. You're just tired that it keeps happening. You've watched the American dream get mined out of the ground, loaded onto a train, and shipped to someone else's mansion. You helped build it, but you can't afford the product. Historians have long debated whether the mining booms of the 1880s were heroic or parasitic. Some say they built the West, created towns, connected railways, pushed innovation. Others argue they were little more than resource grabs wrapped in a romantic myth, exploiting labour and environment alike, and both sides are probably right. The truth is buried somewhere under the rubble. You leave Leadville with a silver coin in your pocket, not one you mined, but one you were paid in. You rub it with your thumb, feel its weight, and wonder how long before it too disappears. Boomtowns don't die with a bang. They fade, quietly. One door boarded up at a time, one bar stool left empty, one dream abandoned. The train out of town rattles with fewer passengers than it had coming in. You sit near the window, staring out at the mountains that still stand tall, unmoved by the gold rush, the mines, or the humans clawing at their flanks, and you think to yourself, whatever's next, it probably won't be easier. You're on the move again, back east this time, but with a detour into the stranger corners of America, the ones that glow under gaslight and flicker with something between salvation and delusion. Because if there's one thing the 1880s have in abundance besides coal dust and desperation, it's belief. Not just the everyday kind you mutter before biting into suspicious street meat, but the grand, operatic, often weird kinds that flourish when the world feels like it's teetering on the edge. This decade isn't just industrial, it's spiritual, explosive, and very much haunted by ghosts, God, and everything in between. You start with the familiar. It's Sunday in a mid-sized town, and the church bells are summoning everyone from bankers to bricklayers. You duck into a packed wooden church where the air smells like old hymnals and somebody's overcooked cologne. The preacher launches into a sermon about hellfire with the energy of a man whose coat is secretly on fire. People shout "Amen" like punctuation. Children fidget. Someone faints in the back, either from the heat or the spirit, unclear. This is the age of the religious revival. The Second Great Awakening may be technically over, but its spiritual grandchildren are alive and kicking. Camp meetings, tent revivals, and roving preachers draw massive crowds all across the country, especially in rural areas. You visit one in Ohio, a field filled with folding chairs, lanterns, and enough nervous energy to power a small mill. A preacher in suspenders stands on a crate and yells about repentance so loud, the cows 3 fields over get nervous. People weep, people wail. A man collapses, speaking in tongues. You can't tell if he's possessed, exhausted, or just really into the moment. Religious diversity is spreading too. Catholic churches are springing up fast in immigrant-heavy cities. Jewish synagogues hold services in everything from grand temples to cramped rented rooms. Small Protestant denominations compete for souls like they're hawking miracle cures. You meet a Seventh-day Adventist who tries to convert you during lunch and hands you a pamphlet titled, "Are you ready for the end times?" You're not sure, but the sandwich was decent. Then there's Mormonism, still controversial, still growing. After their long and bloody path westward, the Latter-day Saints have established a firm foothold in Utah. Brigham Young is gone, but his legacy looms large. The federal government is increasing pressure on them to abandon polygamy, but many Mormons remain defiantly loyal to the old ways. You overhear a debate between 2 men on a train, one quoting the Book of Mormon, the other shouting about American values and decency. They eventually get kicked off the train for scaring a conductor. But the real surprise comes in the form of something far more fringe and far more fascinating. You meet a woman named Hattie, who introduces herself as a spiritualist medium and magnetic healer. She invites you to a séance that night. You hesitate, then say yes. Because why not? The 1880s are weird. You might as well lean in. The séance takes place in a dimly lit parlour filled with dusty lace and perfume that could knock out a mule. The guests sit in a circle, fingers lightly touching. Hattie closes her eyes and begins to hum. The room goes still. Then the table creaks. A candle flickers. A disembodied voice moans something about a lost watch and a debt unpaid. You peek under the table and see one of her feet tapping rhythmically. Later, you find wires running to the bell on the mantel. It's all smoke and mirrors. And yet, one woman leaves crying, clutching a note she believes is from her late husband. Belief, it turns out, doesn't always require truth. Just timing. Spiritualism exploded after the Civil War, when families shattered by loss searched for meaning. The idea that you could talk to the dead wasn't just comforting, it was revolutionary. Even educated people bought in. You find a tattered copy of The Banner of Light, a popular spiritualist paper, and realise it ran for decades. You also learn that many suffragists, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Victoria Woodhull, had ties to spiritualist circles. The connection between reform and the supernatural isn't coincidence. When the world doesn't make sense, people look for answers anywhere. And then there are the occult societies. You attend a lecture hosted by the Theosophical Society, where a man in an immaculate beard speaks for 2 hours about reincarnation, cosmic vibrations, and how Atlantis was definitely real. The crowd nods along like he's reading from the Constitution. Outside, someone tries to sell you a crystal charged with moon energy. You don't buy it, but you do admire the hustle. Quirky side note, Ouija boards are beginning to catch on. Marketed as talking boards, they're sold in toy stores and parlours as an innocent way to connect with the beyond. You try one at a boarding house. The planchette spells out H-E-L-P. You immediately pack it back in the box and walk away. Nope. Not everyone is amused by the rise in mysticism. The press mocks it, the clergy condemns it, and the medical establishment calls it dangerous. But the movement thrives. It's not just escapism, it's empowerment, especially for women. As mediums, they can hold court in parlours, lead sessions, and claim a kind of authority not available to them in more traditional roles. One scholar you speak to calls it the great feminine rebellion disguised as ghost talk. You spend a night with a small Shaker community, famous for celibacy, furniture, and dance-based worship. They live simply, speak gently, and cook with astonishing amounts of boiled root vegetables. You're served something called mock apple pie made from crackers. It's not great. But their kindness is genuine, and their spiritual joy seems real. They sing in the evening, voices rising in strange circular harmonies, and for a moment the world feels oddly still, peaceful even. By the time you return to the city, your head is full of ghosts, gods, and theories. You walk past a Methodist church, a palm reader's storefront, and a Greek Orthodox chapel, all within 2 blocks. People are praying, chanting, waving crystals, burning incense, lighting candles, and writing angry editorials about each other's eternal damnation. And yet somehow, it all coexists. Barely. The 1880s don't offer answers. They offer options. Endless ones. Whether you're looking for salvation, spectacle, or just something to believe in while the country rebuilds itself from the inside out, there's a pulpit or a séance table ready to receive you. You wake to a new kind of noise. Less clatter and shouting, more swishing fabric and snapping laundry lines. It's laundry day, which, in the 1880s, is less of a chore and more of a multi-phase siege against dirt, time, and societal expectations. You pull on your clothes and step outside to see streets lined with white linens, flapping like surrender flags from second-story windows. Women stand at washtubs, scrubbing with terrifying focus, while children carry buckets of water, or try very hard not to fall into them. But today, you're not just watching, you're dressing for the part. Because nothing says immersive experience like buttoning yourself into 17 layers of fabric with no ventilation and no escape. The first step, underwear, and not the kind you're used to. You start with a long one-piece union suit, scratchy, off-white, and already making you question your life choices. Over that goes a chemise if you're presenting femme, or a shirt with a high-starch collar if you're going masculine. Then come corsets, bustles, petticoats, suspenders, garters, stockings, and boots that require a small wrestling match and possibly divine intervention. By the time you're half dressed, you've already sweated through one layer and lost 2 buttons. You're still only halfway done. Men's clothing isn't exactly a breeze either. Wool suits in summer, starched collars so stiff you can barely turn your head. Waistcoats, overcoats, pocket watches, gloves, and hats. Always a hat. Bowler, boater, top hat, or newsboy cap, depending on your station and the angle of the sun. There's an unspoken understanding that appearing in public without a hat is only slightly less shameful than public nudity. And if you're poor, you wear what you can afford, which usually means second-hand, repaired until it's mostly stitches and hope. Children wear hand-me-downs several sizes too big, often held together with pins or belts made from rope. You meet a factory girl whose entire wardrobe consists of 2 blouses and 1 pair of shoes. One for working, one for Sunday, she tells you. The shoes are for both. But no matter your class, everyone is obsessed with looking proper. Clean, neat, buttoned, and not smelling like last night's stew. You stop by a tailor's shop and see men being fitted for suits they can't afford, buying on instalment plans they'll regret. Down the street, a dressmaker with pincushion wrists and a mouthful of pins is sewing ruffles onto a gown for a socialite who'll wear it once and then declare it out of fashion. Style, here, is less about expression and more about compliance. You dress for your role. The uniform matters. Laundry is an entire production. You visit a tenement apartment where a mother of 5 is wrangling wash day like it's a full-time military operation. First, water must be hauled, boiled in a massive black pot dumped into a wash tub scrubbed with lye soap until your knuckles bleed. Then comes the rinse, the wringing, by hand or crank, and finally the hanging. If it's winter, things freeze on the line and have to be brought in stiff as boards to thaw by the stove. If it's raining, you just sigh, wring it out again, and start over. Quirky footnote? Some women use bluing, a blue-tinted liquid added to laundry rinse water, to make whites appear even whiter. It doesn't clean them more, but it gives the illusion of cleanliness, which in the 1880s might be even more important. The laundry game is about optics as much as hygiene. The wealthier households, of course, avoid all this. They employ laundresses, usually immigrant women or freed black women, who collect baskets of filthy clothes and return them days later, somehow cleaner and still intact. The pay is meagre, the labour punishing, and the risk of burns, blisters, and frozen fingers ever present. You talk to one such laundress, named Liza, who washes for 3 families and earns barely enough to cover her rent. She laughs when you ask how she does it. 1 piece at a time, she says, lifting a sheet with arms that could probably bend iron. And the rules of clothing? Endless. White after Labour Day? Unthinkable. A woman showing her ankles outside the beach? Scandalous. A man removing his coat indoors but keeping his hat on? Barbaric. Fashion etiquette in the 1880s is a minefield of class signalling and social judgment. What you wear, how you wear it, when you wash it, it's all a kind of silent language. One broken rule, and suddenly you're the subject of whispers in church or an icy stare at the post office. You visit a department store dressing room where a woman tries on a hat that's more architecture than accessory. It has feathers, beads, and what might be a taxidermied hummingbird. Do you think it's too much, she asks. Before you can answer, the saleswoman appears, hands her a fur stole and says, "Nothing's too much when you're being seen." That about sums it up. But behind the silks and starch lies discomfort most people don't talk about. You hear stories of women fainting from tight corsets, men passing out in wool suits on hot factory floors, children getting tangled in their own suspenders, and don't even ask about bathroom logistics. You watch one man spend 5 full minutes just undoing the buttons on his fly. There are 13 of them. By the time he's done, the urge has passed. He sighs and buttons back up. Historians often frame 1880s fashion as a contradiction, obsessed with control and structure, yet built on impracticality and pain. It reflects the culture, rigid roles, heavy expectations, and the constant need to present a polished exterior no matter what's crumbling underneath. Clothes aren't just protection from the elements, they're armour against judgment. As the sun sets, you remove your layers with something close to reverence. Each button undone feels like a minor victory. Your arms ache from lacing, your feet are blistered from shoes that should honestly be illegal, and you've developed a new respect for the resilience of people who did this every day without ever once screaming into a pillow. You lay out your wrinkled shirt to dry and sit in your undershirt, fanning yourself with a piece of junk mail. Somewhere in the distance, a mother calls her children in from the street, and someone's beating a rug with more enthusiasm than seems necessary. You close your eyes and imagine a world with sweatpants and elastic waistbands. Then you laugh, because here in the 1880s, that's science fiction. Style hurts, cleanliness is hard, and nothing comes without a button hook. You're back on the street, wool pants clinging uncomfortably to your legs, when a strange glow catches your eye. Soft, flickering, and definitely not gaslight. You follow it to a storefront where a small crowd has gathered, staring through the glass like it's a circus attraction. Inside, hanging from the ceiling like some futuristic fruit, is a single electric bulb. It's glowing, quietly, steadily. No flame, no hissing. Just light, impossibly clean and impossibly cool. Welcome to the next big shift of the 1880s, the creeping arrival of modern technology. Electricity is still in its infancy, expensive, finicky, and not even remotely available to the average person, but it's making its debut in grand fashion. You catch a streetcar that's still horse-drawn, of course, and head toward a hotel recently outfitted with this new miracle. As you step into the lobby, the chandelier above doesn't flicker with flame, but shines with smooth, white clarity. A bellboy with the world's most dramatic moustache tells you proudly, "We're wired direct to Edison's Pearl Street station." You nod like you understand what that means. You don't. But it sounds impressive. You visit the power station later that day and it's underwhelming, honestly. Bricks, boilers, wires running in every direction. But it's also historic. This is one of the first electric power plants in the country, and it's transforming how cities think about light, night, and safety. Gas lamps are still dominant, especially outside of major urban areas, but they're no longer the only option. Electricity is the future, and everyone's talking about it. Some with excitement, others with a good deal of suspicion. And it's not just light bulbs. You swing by a department store that's installed electric elevators. No more pulling ropes or hiring two exhausted men to lift a crate of corsets to the third floor. You watch a small crowd nervously step into the elevator car, marvelling at the way it hums and rises without a single horse involved. Someone clutches a crucifix. A child giggles. It's either magic or a very well-behaved demon. Telephone wires are spreading too, stringing across rooftops like a drunken spiderweb. You visit an office where a man proudly dials a few turns on a newfangled telephone device and shouts into the receiver, "Can you hear me?" The voice that responds is faint and fuzzy, but audible. The room erupts in applause. Of course, you're not calling friends just to chat. Phones are expensive, limited to businesses and the wealthy, and the network is still so small you can pretty much memorize the entire directory. But still, instant voice communication. That's science fiction made real. Quirky fact. The first telephone books were only a page long. You could read the whole thing before breakfast. One Boston woman sued the phone company for installing a line near her house, claiming it attracted lightning and the devil. The case was thrown out, but you get the sense a lot of people are still on her side. Meanwhile, over in the kitchen, things are slowly evolving too. Iceboxes are replacing root cellars, and home refrigeration, if you can afford the daily ice delivery, is changing how people eat and cook. You visit a middle-class home where the lady of the house shows off her new coal-fired stove like it's a prize pig. She can bake, boil, and roast all at once, without having to build a separate fire for each task. It's a culinary revolution, and still somehow makes the kitchen feel like a furnace. Plumbing is inching forward as well. Some homes, mainly urban and upper class, now have indoor toilets and running water. You visit a fancy brownstone with a water closet, featuring a high-mounted cistern and a pull chain. It's noisy, a little terrifying and completely brilliant. In poorer areas, it's still outhouses and chamber pots. But the idea of a world where you don't have to empty a porcelain bowl out your window, that's worth dreaming about. You step into a print shop next, just in time to see a typesetter working with a line-type machine. This beast of a device casts whole lines of type in molten metal, massively speeding up the process of printing newspapers. It's loud, hot, and smells like ink and scorched ambition. But it's revolutionary. Information is now cheaper, faster, and easier to spread. You pick up a paper printed that very morning, news from 3 states away delivered to your hands over coffee. It feels like time travel. Historians like to debate whether the 1880s were truly a tech revolution or just a prelude to one. After all, most people still use outhouses, ride in horse-drawn carts, and heat their homes with coal. But the seeds are there. You see it in the flashing lights of the new telephone exchange building, in the quiet glow of an electric sign blinking tri-artonic, in the weird humming hope that things are about to get faster, cleaner, smarter. And then there's photography. You have your portrait taken by a man named Silas, who proudly shows off his dry plate camera, a big, clunky device mounted on a tripod with all the charm of a small Canon. The photo process takes several minutes, requires total stillness, and ends with your face looking slightly confused and deeply suspicious. Still, it's you, frozen in time. In 10 years, someone might see this picture and wonder what kind of life you lived, or what kind of life you hoped for. You end your day in an electric-lit theatre. The bulbs buzz softly above you, and the stage glows like it's been kissed by the sun. The performance isn't much to remember, but the feeling is. You're in a world that's changing minute by minute. The darkness is being pushed back. Machines are talking. People are dreaming in gears and wires. Even if most of the country's still stuck in the mud, you can feel the pull of progress like static in the air. As you walk home, you pass a lamplighter who pauses beneath an electric street lamp. He stares up at it for a long moment, then shakes his head and moves on to the next block. His job, like so many others, is fading. But tonight, the street is brighter, and for once you can see exactly where you're going. You wake to silence, a kind that only exists far from the clang of factory bells and the murmur of street vendors. Instead of soot and sirens, there's dew on the window, the creak of wooden boards beneath bare feet, and the faint rustling of wind through cornfields. You're not in the city anymore. You're in the countryside now, deep into the rhythms of rural America, 1880s style. It smells like earth and wood smoke and damp wool, and everything around you feels slower, but no less demanding. Here, the pace may be different, but the work never ends. The farmhouse where you're staying was built by hand, log walls, stone hearth, slanted floors that make every marble roll downhill. You step outside and immediately sink ankle deep in soft dirt. A rooster eyes you suspiciously from atop a barrel. 2 children, barefoot, sunburned, and already at work, rush past carrying buckets nearly half their size. Morning chores started before the sun rose and you're late. You follow the sound of voices to the barn. Inside, the air is thick with hay, manure, and a kind of focus that city folk can't quite understand. Cows need milking, chickens need feeding, water needs hauling. You try your hand at milking and fail spectacularly, managing to get more on your pants than in the pail. No one laughs. They don't have time. Everyone has a role here, and yours, for now, is clumsy guest who gets in the way. Farm life in the 1880s is a brutal mix of self-sufficiency and dependence on things you can't control. The soil, the weather, the health of your livestock. You meet the farmer, a wiry man named Elias, whose hands are calloused like bark. He tells you the entire year hinges on what happens in 3 weeks of planting and 2 weeks of harvest. You mess up one, he says, and you're bartering turnips for boots all winter. Crops vary by region. Out here it's mostly corn, wheat, maybe some oats or rye. In the south, it's cotton and tobacco. In the Midwest, they're experimenting with new types of grain. Everyone's trying to balance tradition with innovation. Ploughs are getting lighter, reapers are more efficient, and seed drills are becoming common. But most families still do things the hard way because new tools cost money they don't have. The biggest threat? Weather. A storm at the wrong time can wipe out a season. A drought can starve you slow. Hail, wind, insects, you name it. Nature holds all the cards and it doesn't bluff. Elias shows you a field where blight ruined half his crop last year. He didn't tell the bank. Didn't want them sniffing around, he says. You nod, as if you understand what it's like to lose everything because a cloud didn't show up. You help the children collect eggs from the henhouse. One chicken pecks you just for existing. The kids laugh. You watch as they carry the eggs to the kitchen, where their mother, Miriam, is baking bread using flour they milled themselves. She works without complaint, kneading dough like it personally insulted her. You offer to help and she says, "Can you churn?" You say no, but I can learn. She smirks and hands you a butter churn. 2 hours later your arms are numb and the butter still looks suspiciously like cream. The food is simple but sustaining. Cornbread, stew, pickled vegetables, smoked meat from last fall's pig. Everything is made from scratch. Nothing is wasted. The kids even eat the crust without complaint. There's no such thing as being picky when you're 4 months from the next harvest. And yet, For all its hardship, the countryside has its own rhythm. After the work is done, and it does end eventually, there's a kind of peace you never find in the city. Neighbours stop by on horseback to trade gossip and biscuits. The local preacher holds a Sunday picnic in a clearing near the river. You join a gathering at a nearby farm where 3 fiddlers take turns playing old folk tunes, while children chase fireflies and adults drink cider that might be a little too strong for daylight. Quirky fact: some rural communities still use hiring fairs, basically live-action job markets where labourers stand in town squares wearing badges that indicate their trade. Need a ploughman? Find the guy with a straw tucked in his lapel. Looking for a dairymaid? Check the aprons. You attend one in a nearby town and it's somewhere between a job interview and a livestock auction. You watch a teenage boy get hired for the season based entirely on his handshake and the fact that he still has all his teeth. But for many farmers, there's tension brewing. Railroads are charging outrageous shipping rates, banks are tightening credit, prices for crops are falling, even as tools and taxes rise. You hear Elias mutter about those Wall Street boys and how they make the money while we make the food. It's not just grumbling, it's the start of something bigger. Out here, the seeds of the populist movement are being planted along with the corn. People are angry, and for good reason. Scholars often romanticize 19th century rural life, amber waves of grain, honest work, sunsets on the porch, and while some of that is real, they usually leave out the part where half your children die before adulthood. A toothache can kill you, and your entire future depends on whether or not a cow gives birth without complications. The pastoral ideal doesn't include frostbite, famine, or floods. As evening falls, you sit on the porch with Elias and Miriam. The sky turns orange, then purple, then blue. A whip-poor Will calls in the distance. Miriam hands you a mug of warm milk and says, "Tomorrow we're digging fence posts." You nod, pretending your back isn't already plotting its revenge. The children are asleep in one bed, tangled like puppies, and the last chore of the night, checking the fire, falls to you. You climb into the attic room where you're staying, the roof low enough to brush your hair. There's no lamp, just a candle flickering beside the window. You watch it dance for a while, then blow it out. The silence returns, heavy but soft. This life isn't glamorous, it's barely survivable, but it's real, and for all its grit, it has a strange kind of grace. You leave the farm with dirt still caked under your fingernails, and the phantom ache of a wooden yoke across your shoulders. The road back to town is long, dusty, and mostly quiet, until it's not. A sudden commotion draws you off the path, where you stumble onto something electric in the air. Flags wave, buttons gleam on vests, and men with hand-painted signs shout slogans into the sun. You've just walked straight into a political rally, 1880s style, and this, it turns out, is where the real action is. Not in the White House, not even in Congress, but right here, in the noisy, sweaty swarm of working people who've had enough. Politics in the 1880s aren't polite. They're a full-contact sport. You see arguments break out over tariffs, railroads, immigration, and the gold standard, all within the first 10 minutes. A man with a moustache like a walrus is yelling about silver coinage, while another guy insists the Democrats are the true defenders of the common man. A woman in a starched dress waves a pamphlet for the Prohibition Party and declares that whiskey is the devil's spit. Nobody's calm, but everyone's committed. You start to see the same themes emerge again and again: corruption, inequality, and a growing suspicion that the whole system is rigged. And honestly, they're not wrong. The federal government at this point is practically an extension of the railroad barons. Senators are selected by state legislatures, not voters. Campaign financing is a joke. Rich men fund candidates like they're betting on racehorses, and public offices are routinely handed out as political favours. The phrase "spoils system" isn't slang. It's literally how things work. That said, people still vote. Obsessively. Passionately. In some places, turnout hits 80%. It's mostly white men, of course. Black men in the South are being systematically blocked by poll taxes, literacy tests, and plain old violence. Women? Not even on the ballot. But those who can vote do so with enthusiasm bordering on religious fervour. Entire parades form around candidates. Campaign rallies include fireworks, brass bands, and sometimes, just for flavour, a fistfight or two. You stop by a local saloon where the walls are plastered with campaign posters. One depicts a man holding a Bible and a flag, looking skyward like he's auditioning for sainthood. Another shows his opponent scowling next to a bag of money and a rat. Subtle. The bartender cleaning a glass with something that might be a shirt sleeve tells you he's voting Republican this year. They're the party of Lincoln, he says, and I ain't forgot that. Then he pauses. But they're getting awful cozy with them railroad boys. His expression sours. Don't sit right. It's complicated. The post-Civil War political landscape is a mess of regional loyalties, economic anxiety and party machines that can make or break lives. The Democrats control the South, fueled by nostalgia and white supremacy. The Republicans dominate the North, promising progress and industry, but increasingly tangled up with big business. Neither party seems entirely trustworthy, which is why alternative movements are starting to bubble up in saloons, union halls and dusty town squares like this one. You meet a man handing out leaflets for the Greenback Party. He explains, passionately, that the country needs to print more money, not less. Inflation, he argues, would help indebted farmers and workers by making loans easier to repay. The banks hate us, he says proudly. You believe it. Down the street, another group is organising under the banner of the People's Party. Proto-populists calling for railroad regulation, labour protections and direct election of senators. Their slogans are blunt: equal rights for all, special privileges for none. Then there are the labour organisers, tough, tired and brimming with righteous fury. You attend a union meeting in a back room above a general store. It's standing room only. Someone reads from a list of demands: shorter workdays, safer conditions, child labour laws, the right to strike. The room erupts in applause. A woman in the corner whispers to her neighbour, "If we don't fight for it, they'll never give it to us." You believe her too. Quirky fact. Campaign songs are all the rage. Entire choirs perform satirical ballads set to familiar melodies. You hear one sung to the tune of "Oh, Susanna," but the lyrics now involve crooked judges, tax thieves, and a goat named Grover. No relation to President Cleveland, probably. It's ridiculous, it's glorious, and it's effective. People remember the tune, they chant it all the way home, but beneath the noise there's an underlying bitterness. You overhear a former coal miner talking to a schoolteacher. "I fought in the war," he says, "bled for this country, and now I can't afford boots for my boy." The teacher nods. "I teach 4 grades in one room and eat beans 5 days a week." The sense of betrayal is everywhere. They helped build America, and now they're stuck watching tycoons carve it up like a roast chicken. Scholars often debate whether the political turmoil of the 1880s was just growing pains or the start of something deeper. Some say the country was maturing into a real democracy, messy, loud, but participatory. Others argue it was teetering toward plutocracy, with government increasingly serving corporate masters. The truth, as always, is muddled. But as you look around at the faces in this rally, sunburned, furious, hopeful, you realise that faith in democracy still flickers here, even if it's wrapped in protest signs and dried sweat. As the rally ends, a speaker climbs atop a barrel and delivers a final message. They want us to stay quiet. They want us to think nothing can change. But we built this country. We feed it. We power it. And they forget. They need us more than we need them. The crowd roars. You feel it deep in your chest. This isn't just a campaign. It's a reckoning. You walk home through streets still buzzing with conversation. 2 boys argue over which candidate has the better moustache. A woman pins a suffrage ribbon to her coat, even though the law doesn't yet recognise her voice. A factory foreman tears up a campaign flyer, but his eyes linger on it before he throws it away. And you realise that in the 1880s, politics aren't about polished speeches or perfect platforms. They're about survival, identity, power, and the stubborn belief that things should be better, even if the system isn't built to make that easy. The road now takes you somewhere quieter, older, though still very much alive. You cross a shallow river by footbridge and find yourself in the territory of those whose story didn't begin in the 1880s, or even the 1700s. It began long before colonists and cowboys, before railroads and revolutions. You've arrived on land that once stretched from ocean to ocean under the feet of native nations, now reduced to dusty reservations and fragments of sovereignty. Here, in the late 19th century, the legacy of survival is worn like a second skin, tough, cracked, and complicated. The reservation is sparse. Small cabins line a dirt road that leads toward a government agency building, wooden, square, and as warm as a tax audit. Children sit on the steps, their laughter quieter than you'd expect. Their eyes, though, watch everything. You meet a man named Joseph who invites you to sit with him by the fire. His hair is grey, tied back in a thin braid, and his words are precise, as if he's choosing them from a drawer full of sharp knives. You came late, he says. The story's halfway told. In the 1880s, America, native life is caught in a squeeze. After decades of war, forced removals and broken treaties, most tribes have been pushed onto reservations, controlled by the federal government's Bureau of Indian Affairs. Land that once sustained entire nations has been carved, fenced and redistributed, often to white settlers under programs like the Dawes Act, which will soon become law. Communal land is deemed uncivilized. The goal? Assimilation, transformation, erasure. You visit a reservation school, a long boxy building that smells of chalk and tension. Inside, native children sit stiffly at desks, hair cut short, forbidden to speak their own languages, English only, Christianity only, culture out, civilization in. One teacher proudly explains the curriculum: reading, arithmetic, domestic science for girls, and vocational training for boys. We're saving them, she says. You look into the eyes of a boy carving patterns into his desk and wonder what part of him had to be destroyed to make that sentence feel true. Many children are sent far from their homes to boarding schools, Carlisle, Haskell and others, with the motto, "Kill the Indian, save the man." It's not metaphor. Children are stripped of their names, clothing and ceremonies. Some never return. Those who do are different, lost between two worlds, fluent in neither. You hear of one girl who came back unable to speak to her grandmother. She wept for 3 days before disappearing into the hills. Still, culture persists. You join Joseph at a family gathering that's not officially called a ceremony, but feels like one. There's music, low and rhythmic, and food cooked over an open flame. Venison, corn, something bitter and sweet. Stories are told in hushed tones, names spoken with reverence. You see a young girl press a woven bracelet into her grandfather's hand. For strength, she says. He nods, though his hands shake. Later, you learn his tribe once numbered 10,000. Now, a few hundred. But he still calls it home. Quirky fact. The US government outlawed many native dances and religious ceremonies during this era. The ghost dance in particular spread like wildfire across the Plains tribes. It was peaceful, a ritual of hope, calling for the return of ancestors and the vanishing of colonizers, but it terrified federal authorities. They saw it as rebellion, dangerous spirituality. You hear someone whisper about Wounded Knee, and though it hasn't happened yet in your timeline, the dread already lingers in the air, like thunder before a storm. And it's not just about culture, it's about economics. The reservation system was built on dependency. Rations, tools and supplies are issued by the government, sporadically and often with strings attached. Corruption is rampant. You meet a mother of 4 who shows you her flour. It's mouldy. The meat, grey. The winter coats, 2 sizes too small. She shrugs like she's too tired to be angry anymore. We complain, she says, and they say we're ungrateful. Then she laughs. Let them eat it, see how long they smile. You ask Joseph how they keep going. He thinks for a long moment. You forget, he says. We've done this before. Adapted, survived. The land changes, the people change, but we're still here. That bothers them. He smiles, and for the first time it reaches his eyes. That's the part they can't erase. And yet anger simmers under everything. Quiet, coiled, waiting. You hear about Sitting Bull living under surveillance, Geronimo still resisting capture in the southwest, and the young Lakota men who speak of warriors not in the past tense but as a blueprint. The fight is still there, it's just had to get smarter. Scholars debate the period. Were the reservations a temporary measure, a necessary evil, or a calculated tool of cultural genocide? The documents are clear. The intent was assimilation. The result: grief, resistance, and an iron will buried under centuries of forced change. Some call it survival, others endurance. Both are correct. Before you leave, Joseph walks with you along the river. He tells you the names of plants in both English and his native tongue. Some have uses: healing, dye, smoke. Others are just stories, passed from elder to child like an inheritance. You realise that despite everything, wars, policies, schools, borders, this knowledge has survived. Not just in books, but in bones. As you part ways, a child runs up and hands you a stone with a hole worn through the centre. For watching, she says. You ask what she means, just in case you forget something you saw. The sun sets behind the hills. The reservation returns to quiet, but it's not the silence of defeat. It's the silence of resilience, the kind that waits, watches and remembers. And now here you are, dust on your boots, memories stacked like bricks in your mind, 1,000 faces still flickering behind your eyes. You've walked through the steam and sweat of the factories, sipped weak coffee with tenement dwellers, watched fortunes rise and fall in flickers of gold and sparks of electricity. You've worn corsets and overcoats, choked on coal smoke, and survived butter-churning boomtown busts, and at least one slightly cursed séance. Not bad, considering you technically don't belong here.
No.
America in the 1880s didn't give its people an easy ride. It gave them contradictions. It gave them hunger and invention, poverty and splendour, train tracks stretching toward promises that didn't always arrive. You met people who clawed their way up and others crushed beneath the same gears. The rich had chandeliers and caviar. The poor had cabbage water and half a bed. But in both places you found the same thread. People trying to survive, to belong, to matter. You watched revolutions being born, not the dramatic flag-waving kind, but quiet ones. A laundress who saves her tips to send her sister to school. A teacher who refuses to cane her students. A farmer who keeps planting even though the soil's half rock and the bank wants his barn. And sure, the country's still stuck in an identity crisis, torn between its myth and its machinery, but it's moving, fast, sometimes dangerously towards something new, something like modern. You probably won't survive the 1880s in the long run, not if you stay here too long, not if you keep asking too many questions, but that's okay. You've seen what you needed to see, and more importantly, you've felt it, that rough flickering heartbeat under all the soot and steel. So close your eyes, let the coal dust settle, let the gaslight dim. You've earned your rest.